minorities, and in particular the minorities' practice of religion, which is why it goes against, it violates both the Canadian and the Quebec Charter. And that's, I think, an argument that surprisingly Quebecers have not heard enough. Many of the bill's opponents, or the law's opponents, focus on the Canadian Charter, so-called imposed on Quebec in 1982. But this bill pushes aside the 38 first clauses of the Quebec Charter of Rights to protect the law from any challenge based on the right to life, or the right to organize, or to practice religion, or whatever. So, I mean, this bill goes against a charter, Quebec Charter, that was voted unanimously by the National Assembly in 1975, and that up until recently was an object of pride in Quebec. You know, the fact that we had adopted the Charter of Rights unanimously even before the Canadian Charter of Rights came to be. And now, apparently, this is not important anymore. And so, I mean, I agree with Paul. I find it difficult to to conclude that someone who wears a scarf
some people
is
agree.
trying to convince kids in third grade that they should adopt Islam.
A good amount of majority of people agree with the fucking law. No,
the idea that this is what happened in
don't
the
know who
past,
you're
that
fucking talking
priests
to.
were trying, Catholic priests were in fact using the school system to convert kids to the religion, and even in many cases convince them to become priests themselves.
All right, let me pick up this angle then with Noah. There certainly was the suspicion
Never had
among many Anglophones
Muslim
that
try to
Quebec was
convert
being
me. Never
incredibly
had them
hypocritical.
kick me off.
When, for example,
For not
it said
being
we have
Muslim.
a policy of secularism, we don't want religion anywhere in public life, but we're going to allow this massive crucifix in the National Assembly, that's okay. But those days are gone. They haven't said crucifixes are allowed. They've said nothing is allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see anything in that argument that makes sense to you?
You do not wear the crucifix on your
I don't,
fucking
because
head.
I think what you're doing is applying, a crucifix hanging on a wall or not hanging on a wall is symbolic, whereas for me, wearing a hijab is a tenet of my faith, and it's something I do as something I have to do as part of my faith. Now, I wouldn't say that any other Muslim woman has to make that choice. It's a deeply personal choice, but it's not the same as like, it's not the same as saying, I have to wear a specific cultural item, or wear a verse of the Quran around my neck on a necklace or something like that. The hijab for me is a tenet of my faith, and it's very meaningful and important that I wear it as part of my identity. I don't leave the house without it. So the idea that I can simply take it off if I'm a school teacher or in one of these positions that's affected by the bill, and then put it back on at the end of the day doesn't actually fly, because I need to wear the hijab at all times. Now, the application of saying, well, we have a crucifix on the wall or we don't have the crucifix on the wall, again, what cost does that draw from anyone? So back to Paul's point, if the tenet of my faith that was required, if I was a Christian who wore a cross around my neck and I needed to then tuck it into my shirt to go to work, and that doesn't affect me practicing or not practicing my faith in any way, there's no cost drawn there.
Yeah, they should totally make more days we like
a Muslim woman
it's
or,
mandatory mass,
but
you can't.
For example, to make the choice between that career, that job, and their faith is a much bigger choice that you're forcing.
Because guess what? You're going to be teaching people religion in school.
Being equivalent, I think that simplifying that they're all religious symbols and so they're all interchangeable is really an oversimplification.
I take your point on that, but Paul, this often at the end of the day gets down to discussions about who's a majority and who's a minority. And the reality is, Noha may be a minority in the province of Quebec, but Quebecers, of course, are minorities in Canada and in North America. How do you resolve all of those issues about whose minority rights are more important?
You're such a tool.
Well, I'd be surprised if Andre liked the notion that Quebec is merely a minority
If,
within
like,
Canada or North America. Quebec is
no other fucking
local
country has
national
this fucking
majority,
problem.
but the House of Commons is recognized as the nation of Quebec.
Fucking Americans with their
And,
fucking mass shootings.
I mean,
Nobody else has that problem.
I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here. Frankly, majorities
New
impose
Zealand.
their cultural
2 weeks.
preferences on minorities all
One
the
mass
time.
shooting.
It's just that
Fucking their prime minister.
that shouldn't be a justification.
Get your
for
toys
doing
taken
it,
away.
and you should-
Can't play
you
nice.
should weigh,
Get them taken away. 2 weeks.
Offense against remedy carefully in every
Bullshit.
case. I think that the reason young Quebecers are increasingly unimpressed by the kind of quiet revolution generated arguments that we've been rehearsing to you now is that this is meaningless to them. And they agree with everyone on this panel that Bill 21 is essentially a remedy to a non-existent problem. It's no one's problem that people dress differently. And while the remedies imposed by Bill 21 are not catastrophic, that teacher was not fired; she was reassigned, incidentally, to a task that allows her to continue working as an educator. In slightly more extreme situations, people might decide simply that they can't exercise their craft or their profession in Quebec, and they'll move at limited cost to other very nice Canadian jurisdictions. So I'm trying hard not to say that this is the worst law ever or that it's rank bigotry and so on. But I keep coming back to it's a set of dumb solutions to non-existent problems. I'm afraid that's the best I can say for it.
Dumb solutions to non-existent problems, maybe so, but Andre has been warning English Canada, I think I have this right, not to push too hard against Bill 21, regardless of how much antipathy English Canadians may feel towards it, lest a provocation to a new separatist sentiment in the province be stoked. And I guess, Andre, I'd like you to pick up the story there. How concerned should we be that if English Canada pushes too hard against Bill 21, that we're going to see separatism reborn in the province of Quebec?
Nationalist?
Well, the truth is we don't really know what my concern really is. I mean, I'm not saying that Canadians should not, voice their concern or express their opposition to the bill. I mean, we're in democracy and everyone. And this will, if the bill, the law will come to the Supreme Court, and whatever decision the Supreme Court renders may apply to the rest of the country. So Canadians have the right to express their views on Bill 21. However, I think we should not lose the perspective that the solution to this is for the National Assembly, the Quebec National Assembly, to amend or withdraw this law. And this has better chances of happening if Quebecers themselves are convinced that this is a bad law, and if they pressure the government to amend it, possibly a government formed by another political party to amend or withdraw the law. So the solution to this problem will not come from Ottawa or from Brantford or from Calgary or whatever
fucking jackass.
Local or federal gets involved in this. The solution to the problem is within Quebec, and that's why I'm saying, make sure that in other Canadians, when you get involved in the debate, have a positive impact rather than a negative impact of maybe convincing Quebecers that this has become a Canada versus Quebec issue. And of course, when that happens, Quebecers always defend the provincial government. That's sort of a reflex. So that's what we should avoid, and I think we can make this debate a debate about Quebecers' fundamental rights, all Quebecers' fundamental rights, and the Quebec Charter, and convince Quebecers, and apparently polls show that more and more Quebecers are convinced that this is a bad law that should be withdrawn.
Let me do a quick follow-up with you, because if I'm reading between the lines properly, it sounds like you're saying you approve of the approach that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has taken to this, which is to say, my preference is not, the Prime Minister's preference is not to get involved in this, but rather have Quebecers resolve this themselves. That would be the best possible outcome.
So,
I'd add a couple of don't think, for
Usually
instance,
he's so
some
excited.
people have suggested that the federal government should use this disallowance power and cancel or delete the bill. I don't think that's a good solution at all, because that would provoke a very strong reaction in Quebec. But I do think that if someone can stand up and defend in his speeches and whatever, can defend the Canadian Charter and Canadians' fundamental rights, that's the Prime Minister. So I'm not sure I understand exactly why, for
It's still
instance, the
abuse,
federal
I think.
government is not involved in the case in front of the Quebec
It's not a tumor.
Appeals Court. I mean, this law clearly applies into the face of the Canadian Charter, and the federal government, the government of Canada, should defend Canadian laws.
Having said that, Nona, let me ask you: Do you understand why Prime Minister Trudeau has felt a need to tread very carefully, as he either does or does not involve the federal government to a greater or lesser extent in the court challenge on this?
I'm definitely, I understand that it's complex for all the reasons that Andre described, and
Pretty
I
safe.
do feel that a lot of this is maybe politically motivated, staying quiet about it, saying you're offended the questions even asked, for example, in debate. That feels more politically motivated than anything else to me. Not striking down the law, I understand that for the reasons that Andre's mentioned.
Fucking take
But
any
I just
kids
have to say that
to record it?
there's a
That's
personal
good way
cost
to
to
not
this.
fucking
Like we can debate it, you know, in a more theoretical level, but there's a personal cost to this, not just to specific people who are influenced by the law because they can't work in specific roles in Quebec. And to Paul's point earlier, there are people I've spoken to who say, oh, you know, I might have to move, or I don't know that I can live here with this question. Maybe those who have been grandfathered in can stay in their jobs, but there's all sorts of bright young people who are looking to be lawyers or looking to be judges or looking to be teachers who can't do that now, and who are concerned that, okay, you know, I can wait 5 years, but what if another 5 years after that someone introduces something different? None of it's a guarantee. So it's there's a personal effect that way. And then there's also a personal effect on people like myself who aren't directly influenced by the law. And yet what I've found is that when these conversations happen, when the center debate in the province where I live, so I'm a Quebecer, I live in Quebec, and when the debate is about this stuff, this is the time that I experience more microaggressions, that people around me, and the numbers bear it out, experience more hate crimes and things like that. So even if I'm not directly influenced by in my workplace, this kind of discussion ongoing about, you know, what we need to do about minorities in this way or that way emboldens those who are racist to act out on that behavior in whichever way they're going to act out on it. And that's something that we have to deal with over and over. It's an extra burden on top of, you know, everybody's going through a lot right now with COVID and with everything. So adding an extra burden on that is just not a lot of fun. So I do understand, you know, the Prime Minister not necessarily, not trying to strike down the law altogether, but refusing to even really truly answer questions about it. Paul, I read your piece recently about this, and, you know, finding politicians who are trying to find the, you know, to say the least possible words in the longest way. It's quite disappointing, right? Because it's not a theoretical debate. It's got a very personal impact on a large swath of the population, or maybe not a large swath, and that's the whole issue.
What they initially said was, wait, fucking, oh, well, what about the crucifix in the parliament? And they were just kind of like, blasphemy, outrage. How could you even insinuate? It's like, fuck you, guys.
In pushback to Bill 2112, and I wonder how you feel about that.
Well, Jagmeet Singh is making more or less the same calculation that other people are, and perhaps all the more so
Yeah, they fucking buried
he
him.
was
He
buried a lot of
him.
questions and a lot of criticism when he became the federal NDP leader, because he was seen
That's
as essentially
him with some of the wife.
a one-issue
And it's
seat
shit,
nationalist politician.
and people are outraged. French translate the kids, you know what? Yeah.
And so he's actually making really clear that that's not the case. That he's the full buffet of concerns and interests and policies like all the other federal leaders. But Noha touches on an element of this that I really like, which is
It's so hard to watch.
everyone else in Canada is having this debate
Except
for the
who's the
leaders of
job
our
of
federal
important
parties,
really our
because
government
they're making
have
essentially
to justify
cheap
and
bets
explain
on
why
potentially kind of
he
accidentally
disagrees
winning
with
20
this
or
shit.
30 seats in Quebec, instead of talking to Quebecers like adults. And while I didn't agree with Andre that the rest of us should
You guys love
ultimately
just
say
literally you think
say
children run this world.
I will say that
You turn
people
them
in
into
Quebec are
propaganda
perfectly capable of
Nazis.
discussing this like adults, including using some of the scary words like discrimination and minority rights and things like that. So the rest of us should feel free to join them and discuss this
It's a vision
and many
board.
other issues with the richness and the delicacy that they deserve, rather than resorting to slogans and shutting down brown-skinned women journalists for asking questions and debates.
I'll clean it after.
Understood.
Uh-huh.
That's Paul Wells from Maclean's. We also thank Andre Pratt from Navigator, the former senator, and Noha Bashir, who, although in Chelsea, Quebec, is a big Montreal Canadiens fan, and we normally don't allow them on the agenda. But we make an exception tonight. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The agenda with Steve Bacon is made
Like,
possible through generous philanthropic
they're now
contributions
talking
from
about
groups like these.
basically.
Thank you for supporting
Okay, since
TBS
Canada's team did so bad once again, and they fucking overpacked the Bell Center Bureau, and everyone got fucking COVID, and we got 2 weeks of curfew for I don't know why, but whatever. You guys are talking about every fucking sports team, fucking Raptors, fucking. Oh, you won't talk about the Blue Jays, which is great. Okay, talk about Canadian fucking hockey, like the Canucks.
Doctor and medical tests tell you that you're perfectly healthy.
Football, even. Awesome.
The first inhabitants of the territory are the Paleo-American hunters who will become the native people of Quebec. They entered the St. Lawrence Valley when the Champlain Sea was there about 10,000 years ago. There has also been immigration of indigenous people from the Great Lakes to the development of Portland on the Laurentian Plain. In Quebec, there are many groups of indigenous people: Algonquin, Inuit, Iroquoian, Tupi people, and sisters of the Inuit arrived from Alaska and then migrated gradually to the Canadian Arctic about 1,000 years ago. The Inuit are in the northern part of Quebec. Algonquins settled mainly around the lake Témiscamingue and Abitibi, but will later spread to other areas. They are mainly in the Appalachian region and the Canadian Shield. Around the 13th century, agriculture would be controlled in the St. Lawrence Valley by St. Lawrence Iroquoians, who cultivated corn, squash, sunflower, and beans, among others. At the beginning of the 16th century, there will be approximately 30,000 of the indigenous people living in Quebec. In 1508, there is the first French explorer with Thomas Aubert, but it will bring some indigenous people back to France. French, Basque, and Spanish sailors also came to fish in the Gulf of St. Lawrence while hoping to find a passage to China and the Indies. It is, however, in 1534 that there will be a real effort of colonization. Francis I financed the expedition of Jacques Cartier so he could find a passage to Asia. He hopes to find valuable goods such as spices, gold, and silk. On his first trip, Cartier explores the Gulf of St. Lawrence. On June 24, 1534, he will plant a large wooden cross in the name of France. On his second trip, he will arrive at Staracona, a small Iroquoian village. It is due to this speculation that it will also use the word Canada. It is from the word Kanata, meaning village in the Iroquois language. He will then stop at Hochelaga and name the mountain that he found, Mount Royal, in 1535. As the third and last voyage, the colony of Charlebourg-Royal was created with Jean-François de la Roque de Roberval. However, this attempt of colonization was a failure, as his requests did not bring anything. Francis first ceases his financing. The territory will be used by French fishermen to fish in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and trade furs with the indigenous. In 1608, the French explorer Samuel de Champlain founded the city of Quebec to facilitate the fur trade. The city will be the capital of New France. 1 year later, the Battle of Lake Champlain breaks out. Champlain is on the side of the Montagnais, Algonquians, and Hurons who are fighting against the Iroquois. The main economic activity of New France is the fur trade. The population will be populated by several coureurs des bois, independent French-Canadian entrepreneurs who travel to exchange products with the indigenous they met. However, the colonization of New France is progressing very slowly because of the very high cost. The King of France decided to entrust the settlement to private companies. In exchange, they will obtain the monopoly of the fur trade. It will be a failure. In 1617, Louis Barbe trust the settlement to private companies. In exchange, they will obtain the monopoly of the fur trade. It will be a failure. In 1617, Louis Barbe moved to New France with his wife and children. They will be the first family, and it will be recognized as the first farmer in the colony. Later, agriculture will be an important part of the French-Canadian culture because the majority of the population will practice this activity. In 1627, Cardinal Richelieu created a company of 100 associates so that the colonization really begins. During the same year, the same
Oh my god. The fuck? I thought you were switching. What have you been doing?
Painting.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm trying to get my one thing on my bingo sheet done.
I feel like this is a lot of inaccurate information.
You drive yourself crazy, you know?
I'm learning history. I'm just learning the history that I did not learn in
Once
my
in a while, I look at like a cartoon or something funny once in a while.
I
so you
actually
don't go
do
nuts.
look at what do you call it? It's like I guess it's like it's mental health or like fucking but she's like a fuck. She actually reminds me of that girl that I'm trying to find, my friend Steph, who is apparently in the middle of nowhere in BC, and she cannot be contacted other than like one of my old friends, Lydia. She was like, I have to email her, and it takes her a while to message back. And her brother gave me a number, but he was like, I'm not sure if that's the same number because she changes her. Or like she just kind of like does what I do, where it's like, oh, I no longer have a phone, so hopefully that'll be anyway. But she talks about mental health and shit, and she's like, see, health anxiety.
You spend
I'm listening,
hours
just
on the
like,
internet
listen
researching
for a
health and
Go what?
Listening.
The population health is really a great risk. What? Are you fucked? Dude, I'm telling you, that's why my phones keep fucking up. Because Montreal and the gaming thing, we're like doing telecommunication shit, and Elon Musk is like talking about population collapse is the only way to re-civilize.
Now with Elon on the
like,
bandwagon,
fucking-
have you shifted your position on the
call it?
population cliff? I know I'm a broken record. Love you guys. So I'm not
The whole
sure
big
what
story
Elon has said,
again.
but I am
The
going
same
to
old
infer
same
that he
old.
knows.
It's
I'm
really
gonna
I
find out what the
literally
question's
saw
about.
I
the
think this is
satellites,
a
like
reference.
150
Elon said
satellites
something
that
about
he
we should
shot up.
worry more about
And it was like
population
5 o'clock
collapse.
in the morning, and I just looked up
Then,
and
then
Yeah, and you know,
I was like,
I think we need to worry about both things, right? If you,
Yeah.
if you
I
can do the
kind of
Buckminster Fuller
but,
thing,
like, it
then we
was too
can
far.
have a lot of people and we can live pretty well, right? But we're not headed that way. It's not the means that we are utilizing to function. We are liquidating the planet, and that's bad. And that means that the more of us that have to be tended to, the faster the liquidation happens, the less time we have for Elon to figure out how to get anybody off this rock. So,
that said,
These two,
I think you're right. I think we actually have to worry about both things.
Yeah. I do
Because
think
we do
that-
have, there's
Encrypted
serious
shit.
reduction in
Encrypted
reproduction rate in a lot
fucking-
of countries.
coding is
Replacement,
fucking.
we're below replacement rate in many, at least of the weird countries, and yet there's already way too many of us.
The sword
there's
is
another
not the
dimension to
center
this,
of the
which
shield.
is you're wired
Thanks for camera angle.
for producing a next generation and being a temporary
I never noticed the sword.
custodian of humanness,
Yeah,
right?
the first thing I noticed.
If you take that element out,
Then there's the
you
weird
decide to do something
monkey
else. An individual can do
dog
that, but it
thing
drives a
on the left.
civilization crazy. And if there's
And
one
then
thing we
there's
are,
a typewriter,
crazy
a
and getting
fake
crazier.
typewriter.
Is this because people have decided that having kids is a lifestyle choice?
Oh god.
No, but it may be partially because of that. Because the point is,
They built
as
that
they
in,
tried
like,
to
a
teach
couple
many
days.
people in grade school by having them,
Shit.
and egg for a week
Well,
to
it's
see
their
if they keep
basement.
it from breaking.
It's a
The point
set.
is,
That they did in the basement.
having children, if you're wired correctly, is a clarifying experience because they ain't that easy to raise. It's not that automatic. They require a certain amount of
Yeah,
stuff,
but you
and
can't. You can do long
as meaning
division.
to life,
It's
right?
too dumb.
I'm not interested really in
There's so
facing
many
a society of
things.
people who
I don't know.
become self-obsessed because there isn't something else that needs their attention.
Well, that's
Yeah.
that seemed like one of the biggest threats, right?
Are you gonna
Exactly
come out
this,
with me
the
in the
people
freezing
of sort of prime
cold?
reproductive age being precisely self-obsessed.
What, Jack?
And,
You gotta go out.
frankly, better that than having kids that they then ignore or abuse.
Oh, of course.
But
No fucking shit.
in fact, we seem to have both.
Yes.
Possibly the most pleasing thing to me was that oddly enough, my
greatness comes at a cost. It's being the light in darkness. Always charging forward. You need to be technical and disciplined. But dream like an artist.
the books have sold quite well in Brazil, of all countries. I mean, it never occurred to me that they might sell in Brazil.
Okay.
As the first farmer in the colony. Later, agriculture would be an important part of the French-Canadian culture because the majority of the population would practice this activity. In 1627, Cardinal Richelieu created a company of 100 associates so that the colonization really begins. During the same year, the seigneurial regime will be introduced. A seigneurie is a strip of land located near the St. Lawrence River that belongs to a person who is called a seigneur. Moreover, the seigneur will represent 2.5% of the population, while the peasants and the artisans 80%. In 1629, David Kirk and his brothers took the city of Quebec while Great Britain and France were at war. They gave the city back 3 years later when they realized that the peace between the two countries was restored. In 1634, the city of
So what were you
Cherbourg
talking
was
about?
founded by
Oh,
You said something.
everyone loves Canadians, right?
Again,
Except for
already?
these guys. Only they are Canada, part of the
Come
original
on, it
Canada, as a matter of
says-
fact. Well, let me explain. Now, unlike
Ten or
with their
11
southern
o'clock.
neighbors of the
It's
United
11
States, in Canada, one of the biggest points of contention when it comes to
Or, yeah,
politics
earlier
revolves
with
around
the morning.
very similar to another country I've talked about here before.
Well,
And although tensions regarding separatism have somewhat subsided in recent years, there was a point in time only a matter of decades ago when Canada was on the brink of splitting into
2 o'clock in the morning.
There you go. Fine, whatever. Maybe.
Oh, Canada. Everyone loves Canadians, right? Except for these guys. Only they are Canada. Part of the original Canada, as a matter of fact. Well, let me explain. Now, unlike with their southern neighbors of the United States, in Canada, one of the biggest points of contention when it comes to politics revolves around language, very similar to another country I've talked about here before. And although tensions regarding separatism have somewhat subsided in recent years, there was a point in time only a matter of decades ago when Canada was on the brink of splitting into 2, 3, or possibly even more smaller nations. So how could one of the most peaceful countries on the planet that consistently ranks among those with the highest life expectancies, higher standards of living, and most trusting populations have such a huge issue dividing their country in half? It has often been said that although Quebec as they call it, lies geographically in North America, they have long had more of a European mentality when it comes to politics and culture, more so than any other former European colony. And this is primarily due to the linguistic divide between the inhabitants of Quebec and other North Americans. As everyone knows, the Spanish were the first Europeans to land in North America. Well, not really. And the French were the next to follow them in the exploration of this new land. Or not really. The French did indeed provide some of the most renowned explorers of the New World after the landing of Columbus, especially in Northern America, and many French traders, hunters, and navigators began to settle near the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River as early as the mid-16th century, but most of the settlements were short-lived. And this new land stretching from the Atlantic through the continent down to the Gulf of Mexico, the overwhelming majority of settlers were single men, either those hoping to make their living in the New World, or priests who attempted to establish relations with and convert the local Native American population. Unlike many other parts of the Americas, the Native population was not immediately subjugated under the colonial rule, with the French having established rather positive relations with many of the native tribes through missions and trading outposts, and it became extremely common for French settlers to marry native women, often through trading. Yeah, I know it's weird, but that was normal back then. And the offspring of such those with the highest life expectancies, higher standards of living, and most trusting populations have such a huge issue dividing their country in half. It has often been said that although Quebec as they call it, lies geographically in North America, they have long had more of a European mentality when it comes to politics and culture, more so than any other former European colony. And this is primarily due to the linguistic divide between the inhabitants of Quebec and other North Americans. As everyone knows, the Spanish were the first Europeans to land in North America. Well, not really. And the French were the next to follow them in the exploration of this new land. Or not really? Well, the French did indeed provide some of the most renowned explorers of the New World after the landing of Columbus, especially in Northern America, and many French traders, hunters, and navigators began to settle near the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River as early as the mid-16th century, but most of the settlements were short-lived. And this new land stretching from the Atlantic through the continent down to the Gulf of Mexico, the overwhelming majority of settlers were single men, either those hoping to make their living in the New World, or priests who attempted to establish relations with and convert the local Native American population. Unlike many other parts of the Americas, the native population was not immediately subjugated under the colonial rule, with the French having established rather positive relations with many of the native tribes through missions and trading outposts, and it became extremely common for French settlers to marry native women, often through trading. Yeah, I know it's weird, but that was normal back then, and the offspring of such unions formed a COVID-19 is not the only public emergency that public health units in this province are contending with. The opioids crisis is why...
No thanks. Well informed about.
The cost down. Even after the quiet...
I hate you.
A year or two ago, a friend of mine came to visit town. He was looking around at all the buildings and said, "Wow." I said, "What?" And he said, "Man, I just love it." After he said it, I looked around myself and was like, "Yeah, you know what? I love brick too. That's part of the reason I love the architecture here. You know, these clay bricks, and they're so warm and natural, and it just kind of feels like this embrace from nature in the cold winters when you're stuck inside. Kind of like wood as well. Wood. You just have to love brick, you know. It's just kind of, it's warm, it's beautiful. Look at it. Isn't it great?" There's a terror on our streets. They're called property flippers, and they're fucking painted bricks. Why? You know, honey, I think most economists would disagree with this use of our time, but personally, I like attributing the appreciation and value of this property we bought to the time we spent this weekend painting the historic brick exterior. Certainly not the fact that Montreal's housing market has risen every year for the last decade, in part due to the unique historic architecture that we have just slopped pink paint all over. So what's wrong with painting brick? It damages the brick, because brick is made to breathe, clay brick that is. It's supposed to absorb moisture and release it over time. When you paint the brick, you stop it from having that property, and because of the way that it absorbs moisture, it immediately starts to look shitty. You'll notice if you walk around town and you see any brick that someone's painted over, a lot of it is kind of flaking off. So long after that property flipper has gone, they're going to be painting and repainting that stupid fucking wall, or they're going to have to sandblast it. Or in the end, what most people seem to do is they paint it like a red that matches the brick until, I guess, eventually one day they get the brick wall back. For me, though, the biggest problem with painting brick is it's kind of part of this disrespectful architecture problem. Montreal is a city that has built all of its architecture in the past with limestone and clay brick. So in Montreal, brick shouldn't be black and it shouldn't be concrete grey. Brick in Montreal, my friends, should be made of clay. It's gonna haunt me. You see this everywhere. There'll be some nice building made of stone or brick, and then there'll be this shitty, kind of disrespectful building beside it that could just be in any town of Canada. As Montreal grows, we're going to need to densify. We don't want to create a kind of exclusionary city like Paris or London. But there are many examples of big buildings that have followed the principle of using a clay brick, and, you know, it just automatically fits in better. So if you do this, or this, what you're building is going to age in gracefully into the neighborhood. But if you do this, it's just not. A lot of the time, it's just more expensive to make buildings with nice exteriors. But the thing about architecture is it isn't just buildings. These things are pieces of public art, and it's a legacy that we're going to be passing on to the next generation. And that generation, they're just not going to want your IKEA furniture version of buildings. So if you're in the market for a place to live, try to go for something that respects the neighborhood that it's in and doesn't hide cheapness in architectural renderings of nice rooftop pools. Because when you don't put in effort and just do stuff as cheaply as possible, this is what your condo is going to look like. So just don't fall for it. Sorry this video is so short. I'm working on a really massive project right now, so it just takes more time than I can. I got to figure out a different workflow or something. Anyways, see you next week. So I was talking to Sterling during the Unfriction Festival about how people could get into graffiti if they want to try it out, but want to skip the running around at night side of things. Spray painting is super fun, very fulfilling. 10 out of 10, highly recommended, A+, good use of a weekend. good for you. You should do it. Well, I want to, but how? The good news is that unlike a couple of decades ago, there's now plenty of options for someone wanting to try out graffiti. I guess that's the upside of the mainstreamification of things. You know, that kind of sucks for people who like being in shadows and in the dark. But now you can start off in a far more socially acceptable, grandma approved, everyone's happy, apart from people who are really into it. So here is my recommendation for someone starting out. You've just watched Exit for the Gift Shop and you're like, super cool, but I don't want to break the law. That's illegal. So I'm here at the legal wall. There's quite a few around town. A couple of years after I moved to Montreal, there was a friend of mine who noticed I was painting and was like, why not take that pussy painting that you were doing on some canvas and put it on a wall? And it kind of amassed the whole thing, you know? Okay. Hi. There's actually 6 legal walls in Montreal to choose from, where you can basically paint stuff without being hassled by anyone. It's totally legal and totally fine. And you can hang out and have a beer that makes you feel a little more confident. Support the Mural Fest with a Belgian moon. As a city councillor, Sterling did not endorse this, but social anxiety sure does. Legal walls in town are honestly a great way to spend the day. Whatever you do will get painted over within a few days. So it's very much just about trying something out and then, you know, like mastering the skill. It's perfect if you don't really want it to last. Sterling had an idea though, which I recommend you graduate to if you really enjoy your day at the legal wall. So I'll call this the allowed wall.
So where you live, your community, place where you go all the time, you buy stuff, you walk in, you know the person who works there, you go in and you ask them, you say, you know what, the side of the building is constantly being vandalized, or you're spending money to clean it, the city's cleaning it. I'd like to do a mural on the side of the building. I'd like to do some artwork. Is it possible to get permission to do something on the side of the building? You may get a no. But the fact is you asked, and then you go ask somebody else. The city cleans for free anyways. So the thing is, there's no reason for an owner to give you the wall if they don't want to. So the problem with a legal wall is it creates a sense of entitlement. What's interesting about having to go somewhere and ask permission is it actually helps develop entrepreneurship. The majority of writers who you see painting prolifically are entrepreneurs. So they have no problem going, and they know how to ask somebody, they know how to deal with it because they've done it. You want them to be financially independent. You want them to be creative. You want them to start their own agencies. You do things. So we did that in the 90s when we were bombing and tagging. We started painting walls. It started with us painting walls, then painting contracts for movie sets or for local people who would offer us stuff, paying for our equipment, paying for our paint, then paying us money. We reinvested that money, started our design firm, started doing design work for other things, this and that, and we evolved. And the festival started, and all of this stuff. We published a magazine for 10 years. Like, all of this stuff was entrepreneurship.
So Sterling's advice is totally rational and definitely required if you want to have a career doing this sort of stuff. During these videos, I've been standing on a wall that I actually painted a few years ago. I basically did what Sterling advised. I talked to the person who owned this wall, or he probably doesn't actually own the wall, but whatever. This wall used to be a concrete, ugly wall that no one really liked. So the owner was planning on planting a bunch of vines in front of it to cover it up. So I said, well, you know, just before you do that, why don't I have a go at it? I can paint a robot or something like that on it. And he said, sure. And you can tell he was a little bit like nervous, like, it might be ugly, I might not like it. But I'd say, given that the vines did not get planted, he's okay with what ended up happening. I still suck at graffiti, but when painting this wall, I learned more and advanced more than anything else that I ever did. If you're painting something that's going on a business or going on a friend's house or something like that, you're really going to push yourself to do something that you're going to be proud of, especially if it's going to be sticking around for a few. So that's why below this video, there's a link. If you're a person who's wanting to do a few reps, you're not at a professional level, but you need to get a bit more practice, and you can fill in some basic details and you'll get your name put onto a list. There's also another link for if you're a person who owns a wall that is far too blank and boring for a Montreal winter, you can also fill out a form saying that you have a wall and you're open to letting someone learn and practice and try out something on it. What I'll be doing in the spring is sending out an email to all the people who own walls with all the graffiti artists who said that they'd be willing and interested in painting a wall and practicing their graffiti. The rest is up to you. You still need a bit of hustle, but this will make it maybe just a little bit easier. It's like online dating for people with walls and people with pain. We'll see how it goes. If it goes well, I'll commit to renewing this each year as a thing that we do. So I talked about graffiti enough for a while, or is it street art? Woo! This video, like most videos that I do, was voted on by Patreon people. So jump over there if you'd like to suggest topics or influence my creativity. This month I'll be giving away a few of my original pieces, so you can see the stuff that I make. We're not making videos about walls. So you go to a dairy or sorry, that was random. I have very New Zealand. Honestly, I've never. That's the first time in a year. I like that. Yeah, we're going to be talking about this. Jesus.
Kashi Go Lean. Get high protein and high fiber in just one bowl.
Anxiety.
The whole situation lasted about 10 minutes, and I just feel really fortunate.
I'm Alan Robarge. Well,
one question I have about in terms of moving forward into the future that I'm concerned about. You painted the image earlier of Mark Zuckerberg there without the VR headset and everybody around him with the VR headset. I mean, they're making a big move into the metaverse. Everything I've seen there has been fairly dystopian. There are investors who are snapping up like $1 million properties on fake Rodeo Drive or whatever. I mean, what are your thoughts and opinions on the metaverse and how?
We're in the middle of about a 5-year period when some 100 new cars with a
Hey, YouTube.
Hey guys, welcome back to Kingdom.
Okay, finally back from vacation, so it's time to start back in with a somewhat normal routine. First things first, I'm thinking about changing the channel name to just Upper Echelon instead of Upper Echelon Gamers. The content wouldn't be changing at all, just the name, so let me know your thoughts down below. With that out of the way, let's discuss TikTok, because I believe that the app is verifiably impacting almost an entire generation of the human species in a decidedly negative way. Before getting started, I want to go a bit of a tangent here. September 22nd, 2020, I posted a video to the channel titled Why I Hate TikTok. Now, ordinarily, this would have just been like any other video, but this time it actually wasn't. When posting content on YouTube, there is a number of different viewership patterns that can occur. The most common format is a large initial spike and then eventual plateau when the content has been viewed by your subscriber base, subsequently dropping out of algorithmic favorability afterwards. That's the most common format for this channel in particular, and for many others on the platform as well. However, the most common format is not always the most desirable. The best viewership pattern is usually called evergreen content, and it occurs when a video becomes embedded in the algorithm and ranks highly enough in popular search terms or general browse features to continue gaining traction over time in a very reliable way. This type of content is effectively the holy grail for us creators because it can result in hundreds of thousands or millions of views over the span of years. Some of my Red Dead Redemption 2 guides way back in the day achieved this level of indexing and are now crossing the multi-million view threshold with reliable results for the past 36 months at least. Making content that achieves this level of tenacity is not exactly easy or predictable, and for me personally, it's only happened a handful of times. One of those times was September 22nd, 2020. The video I posted, the video titled Why I Hate TikTok, pushed beyond my average view count on the channel and continues even now to climb well beyond most of the other content that I've ever posted. Normally, I wouldn't even notice, but Over the past few weeks, a variety of different factors have aligned, which made me realize why that occurred and spurred me to once again discuss the topic, this time defining why I believe that TikTok is effectively a viral form of societal poison, and it is well on its way to destroying an entire generation. It all starts with the advent of internet dominance. Early-stage internet usage and functionality was largely relegated to scientific research, military industrial projects, and fail-safe protections during the Cold War, but in the early 1980s, something changed. At the start of 1983, a new protocol was established, TCP/IP, which allowed different kinds of computers on different networks to communicate with each other. This is widely regarded as the unofficial birth of the modern internet age, and this fundamental building block is what allowed nearly everything else we know today to become possible. The internet became a staple of modern life: commerce, accounting, security, entertainment, all of it. But in tandem to these utility-driven industries, there was a social aspect. Early examples like 6 Degrees or Friendster paved the way for superior projects like Facebook to arise in 2004. As of 2021, there were an estimated 4.6 billion internet users on planet Earth, and 4.1
Hi, can I help you? I need to hang some shelves in my garage. I'm looking for wood, nail.
1 billion of those users use social media. Further stats can be found that describe user habits, such as the staggering revelation that users who participate on social media platforms utilize, on average, over 6 different options in their daily lives. Average daily usage time is over 2 hours, and if someone began their social media journey at age 16, for example, using the platforms until age 70 or thereabouts, they would spend nearly 6 years of their life on these websites. All of this is to establish one crucial idea. Social media has become an integrated part of our lives, and when the average user, one of over 4 billion people, is spending more time on social media than they do eating or drinking combined on a daily basis, it signifies that this activity has become something larger than a simple hobby. Social media, on average, again, has become a primary piece of our very existence. Why does this matter? Simply put, it matters because of the detrimental effects. From 2013 to 2017, scientists in Denmark observed that collective hashtag longevity was steadily decreasing. In a study titled Accelerating Dynamics of Collective Attention, it was discovered that the average duration of a hashtag's trending dominance in the top 50, for example, had decreased from 17.5 hours to 11.9. This alone does not constitute definitive proof that our attention spans are shrinking, but in a further study titled Abundance of Information Narrows Our Collective Attention Span, that connection was well established and properly examined. Social media was contributing and is contributing to a reduction in average.
Are we okay? I think we're okay. Oh my god.
Average attention span can come with a variety of risk factors.
Fuck, I hate you.
Academic performance, communication struggles,
God,
and
you
relationship
suck.
difficulties or neglected
Don't
as
ever
a one's inability
get
to practice
anything
reliable
from
habits.
Microsoft.
These problems are universal, but they absolutely do exist.
I just don't understand. It doesn't even stick anymore. Fucking douche. Okay.
And they're not alone. Social media is lowering our attention span, which has various negative consequences, but how is that bad enough to deserve such an explosive video title? Here's why. In 2021, Curtin University published research indicating that individuals with a short attention span are at a significantly higher risk for psychological distress and related mental health issues as a result of high social media usage. This research delved into the idea of attention control impacting one's resistance to advertising, among other things, just as one example, and highlighted how those with a decreased attention span were susceptible to increased emotional manipulation, unattainable ideals, and exacerbated feelings of depression or anxiety as a result of the content that they watched. However, this is a wider concept stretching beyond TikTok alone, so why is the focus primarily there, at least for this video? The best explanation is that TikTok has a remarkable ability to influence youth behavior. In June of 2021, research began to emerge about how tics, as in facial tics or behavioral tics, were spreading through the platform. And a few months later, medical research began to appear indicating that there had been a dramatic rise in tick-like behavior, physical behavior, for young females during the COVID pandemic. This dramatic rise coincides directly with a viral trend on TikTok, where users were displaying their behavioral tics in everyday situations. TikTok is proven to be capable of impacting youth behavior in a significant way, and in my previous video, I focused on scams, disgusting trends, or child predation even, but I realized that the actual problem is much more broad. The functionality of TikTok is designed for rapid digestion. Videos are short, between 15 and 60 seconds, though users tend to watch even just a much smaller segment of that already condensed format. The application spurs tremendous engagement, and users are spending, on average, over 80 minutes at least per day on this one platform alone. From the very beginning, it was marketed at children. The founders understood their primary demographic and targeted them very effectively, more recently even being hit with widespread legal action in Europe over their hidden initiatives to target minors on the platform for various challenges and advertising. Most importantly, in late December of 2021, according to Cloudflare, TikTok officially surpassed Google as the most visited domain name on planet Earth. Conceptually, that is alarming because Google, maintaining its dominance for an extended period of time, is a portal to nearly every other popular website in existence. Yet TikTok, as a domain name, surpassed even the utility of finding other content through a search engine in popularity, not to mention the existence of Google Maps, Google Photos, email, news, etc., which are all factored into that calculation. TikTok boasts over 1 billion users. Its primary traffic is contained right now to the United States for the moment, but it operates globally with a rapidly growing footprint. The short-form content seems to have a direct impact on attention span, decreasing it in a noticeable way. The application has been aimed at a youthful demographic since day one, very deliberately, and successfully influenced their behavior, their physical behavior, on more than one occasion, up to and including movement disorders like behavioral tics. Shorter attention spans increase the relative risk for users of social media, which means, right, and bear with me here, that TikTok simultaneously decreases one's attention span, impacts their behavior, and serves as a platform where the social media risk factors of a decreased attention span can be experienced and realized. TikTok exacerbates, then fulfills the problem at the same time in a closed loop, and the average time that children spend on the platform is rapidly increasing every day, dethroning even Google as the most popular website on the planet. TikTok has become an epicenter of provocative trends. Remember how the company is under fire in Europe, legally speaking, for its targeted advertising at children and the challenges? Yeah, I'm talking about those. Recently, even including a widespread threat of violence in the United States. The trend started as a plea for children to stay home from school in mid-December because there might be something going on, and evolved to include bomb threats and other inflammatory content, triggering an actual police response all across the entire country, which equates to a legitimate, measurable, and significant waste of resources. TikTok trends and activity challenges have included things like the Blackout Challenge, where children were tasked with holding their breath until they fainted. There was the Penny Challenge, where kids were pushing pennies behind partially plugged-in phone chargers, which can have many dangerous results, or even the Tooth File Challenge, where videos went viral of children filing their own teeth and causing permanent damage. More so than probably any other social media platform entirely, TikTok is capable of modifying behavior. At the same time, it shortens attention spans and then triggers the intrinsic dangers of social media for those with attention control issues, making it a one-stop shop for nearly every single thing that should not be happening online for 100 million children. In fact, as per the most recent numbers that I could find, TikTok's user base likely contains something like 600 million children, including 63% of American teenagers ages 12 to 17 active using the platform. All of this ignores other fundamental problems with the app, like an unregulated and highly sexualized environment that awards behavior that any good parent would rightly condemn. But rather than talking mostly about specifics this time, I want to focus on the more intrinsic dangers of this platform, because TikTok is the most popular digital environment on Earth when it comes to youth engagement. And that engagement is a self-reinforcing spiral of negative effects. This does not mean that every single piece of content on TikTok entirely is automatically bad, but it means that browsing the website for upwards of an hour or 2 hours every single day can become an actual danger to the mental and physical health of our children. In the end, decisions about TikTok are obviously up to the individual, but I find myself maintaining a stance that it is, by far, the most harmful social media platform on the planet and is actively destroying a generation for numerous different but equally severe reasons. That's it. If you want to support, there are links down below. I'm pushing for Patreon and locals to become the primary income stream for the channel YouTube advertising, so check those out if you have any interest. There is a YouTube alternative as well called Odyssey, where all the content is. Another YouTuber to check out, merchandise, etc., but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.
So all summer in celebration of Canada's 150th anniversary, we've been showing you some unique places across the country. Today, we talk a lot about zoning regulations on this channel that make housing more expensive and contribute to urban sprawl and bad city design. The worst is zoning that bans most types of housing: duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, mid-rise apartments, and so on. And only allows family detached homes. In most North American cities, this type of zoning applies to the majority of residential land.
Joining us now, we have best-selling author Johan Hari. His latest book is Stolen Focus: Why You Cannot Pay Attention.
And so this is Balto. It's a pretty simple concept that solves a frustratingly challenging problem. How do I, at scale, consistently get my agents, my reps to...
Joining us now, we have best-selling author Johan Hari. His latest book is Stolen Focus: Why You Cannot Pay Attention, which landed pretty close to home for me. Johan, great to have you. Welcome to the show.
Good to see you, sir.
I love you. I love your show, so I'm so excited to be with you.
That means a lot because I'm a longtime fan of your work as well. So I listened to your book on 2.5 times speed, which I felt a little bit guilty about. Some of the themes are like, you should slow down and you need time for your brain to roam while you're listening. But anyway, I still got a lot out of it. Why don't you just tell our listeners and viewers to start with what brought you to this concern that our brains are actually changing and we're not able to focus in the ways that we perhaps were able to a generation ago?
So I noticed that with every year that passed, things that require deep focus, like things that are really deep to my sense of self, like reading a book, watching long movies, were getting more and more like running up a down escalator. You know what I mean? I could do it, but it was getting harder and harder. And I noticed this was happening to a huge number of people around me. I was particularly worried about the young people in my life, a lot of whom seem to be whirring at the speed of Snapchat. So I was wary of looking into this. Like, at first I thought, well, every generation struggles with its attention. Is anything new happening? And even very early on when I started looking at the evidence, for every one child who was identified as having serious attention problems when I was 7 years old, there's now 100 children who've been identified with that problem. The average American office worker now focuses on only one task for only 3 minutes. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try and understand this. So I used my training in the social sciences at Cambridge to travel all over the world and interviewed over 200 of the leading experts on attention and focus, from Miami to Moscow to Melbourne to Montreal, not just cities that begin with the letter M. And I delved really deeply into their science. And what I learned is the evidence of 12 factors that can make your attention better or can make it worse. And loads of the factors that can make your attention worse have been significantly increasing in recent years. But your attention didn't collapse. Your attention has been stolen from you by these big forces. We have to respond in two ways. We have to have defense and offense. We have to defend ourselves individually as much as possible, but we're going to have to go on the offense against the forces that are doing this to us.
There. You're looking at a guy who hasn't read a real book in 5 years, but has probably listened to hundreds of books at 3.5 speed. So I'm right there with you. I also find the same thing. I recently did Apocalypse Now, the Redux one. It took me 3 days to get through a 3-hour movie because you're constantly checking something. So what does going on offense look like? What should people like me and other people be doing?
Yeah, it's interesting because that thing that you just said is a really good illustration of why I think this is so important. So just say to anyone watching, think about anything you've ever done that you're proud of, whether it's learning to play the guitar, writing a screenplay, being a good parent, whatever it might be. That thing that you're proud of is something that required
deep focus and attention. And when attention and focus break down, our ability to achieve our goals and our ability to solve our problems also breaks down. That's happening at an individual level. We can also see this happening at a big collective level. So I think what we have to do first is understand what these 12 factors are. When I started doing the research, I thought this would be largely a book about big tech. Big tech is a huge factor in this, massive one. I actually don't think it's the biggest. The factors that are causing our attention to collapse, right from the sleep we no longer get to the food we eat. The food industry has ruined our brains. There's a whole array of these factors. But in terms of going on the offense, I think what we've got to do is, I would argue there's a historical analogy that can help us to think about it. So I think we're all about the same age. You guys are a little bit younger than me, actually. So it used to be, I can just remember that it was normal that people put leaded gasoline in their cars. My mother used to do it. People used to paint their homes with leaded paint. And it was known for years that this profoundly damaged children's brains, and in particularly their ability to focus and pay attention. But the lead industry funded a kind of pseudoscience to deny it all. They blamed individual mothers, said they didn't dust their homes enough. But by the 70s, the evidence was so overwhelming that they rose up a movement of ordinary people, mostly mothers, who just campaigned and said, why are we allowing our children's brains to be destroyed in this way? Let's not allow it. And it's important to notice what they didn't say. They didn't say, let's ban all paint. They didn't say, let's ban all gasoline. They said, let's ban the lead in the paint and the gasoline. And in a similar way, for all of the 12 factors that I write about in my book, Stolen Focus, there are lots of things we can do as isolated individuals to protect ourselves and our kids. I'm passionately in favour of individual action, but we've got to level with people. At the moment, it's like somebody is pouring itching powder over us all day, and then they're leaning forward and going, hey, buddy, you might want to learn how to meditate, then you wouldn't scratch so much. To which the obvious response is, okay, I'll learn to meditate, but we need to stop you pouring itching powder on us. And we need to do that in targeted ways. So I can explain, for example, the specific aspect of the way our tech currently works that is invading our attention that we can change if we want to through collective action.
Different factors, and certainly tech is one of them. And just, you know, my own personal experience, I actually sort of blamed my lack of focus and ability to like hold one thought in my head for a sustained period of time. I sort of blamed my kids on it, because when I started having kids was about the same time that I think all of these tech platforms really started to invade my life and take over a lot of space. So I thought, oh, this is just mommy brain. Like, I have too many slots in my brain are filled with like where my kids' shoes are and when the next ballet lesson is. And that's why my focus has been lost. And I still think that's probably a part of it. But you've helped me to understand some of the other things that are going on, and also to give myself a little bit less of a hard time about some of those brain failures that I experience all the time. But, you know, as I look at all these different factors, doesn't it just really come down to one factor, which is capitalism? I mean, when you talk about big tech and their profit motives, when you talk about big food and their profit motives, when you talk about the companies that are polluting the environment that has tremendously negative effects on our children, for example, or even you get into the fact that we sleep less is even because of this profit motive. Because if you're asleep, you're not making anybody any money. And if you're only focused on one screen instead of 5, then that's also less ability to sort of bombard you with money-making, profit-making potential. So isn't the real problem here sort of that profit-making, you know, being central to our lives in all of these different spheres?
It's a big part of it. This is a big systemic problem, and there are key aspects of how capitalism is currently functioning that are profoundly damaging our attention. Just like everyone watching your show knows from your brilliant coverage, that the way capitalism works is pushing us beyond our ecological limits. The way it currently works is also pushing us beyond our attentional limits. So that can sound a bit fancy and grand, so I'll give you a very clear example. I went to interview one of the leading experts in the world, one of the neuroscientists in the world, Professor Earl Miller. He's at MIT. And he said to me, look, there's one thing you've got to understand more than anything else about the human brain. You can only think about 1 or 2 things consciously at a time. That's it. This is a fundamental limit of the human brain. Hasn't changed in 40,000 years. It's not going to change on any time scale we're going to see. But what's happened is partly as a result of the dynamics you're describing, we've fallen for a mass delusion. The average teenager now believes they can follow 6 or 7 forms of media at the same time. So when scientists get people into labs and they get them to think they're multitasking, they study them. And what they discover is when you try and do lots of things at the same time, you're in fact not doing lots of things at the same time. You're very rapidly juggling between them. What was that on WhatsApp? What did she just ask me? What was that on Facebook? Wait, what did the TV screen just say? And that comes with a really big cost. The technical term for it is the switch cost effect. When you try and do more than one thing at a time, you will do everything you're trying to do less competently. You'll make more mistakes. You'll remember less of what you do. You'll be less creative. This might sound like a small effect. It's really big. One study found just receiving 8 text messages an hour lowers your mental performance by 30%. If you're interrupted by something as small as a text message, it takes you on average 23 minutes to get back to the level of focus that you had before you were interrupted. But many of us are never getting 23 minutes without being interrupted. Now, partly that's because someone's got kids. I understand entirely why that's happening to you. But there's been an extra layer of interruption that's been layered onto all of us because, and it's important to understand, the way big tech want us to think about this is, are you pro-tech or anti-tech? And that just induces a kind of fatalism, because we're not going to all go and join the Amish. No disrespect to any Amish who are watching. I think it's unlikely, but if they are, we're not going to do that, nor should we. And we want our tech. So, of course, that induces a fatalism. We think we'll just have to be pro-tech then. The question is not, are you pro-tech or anti-tech? The question is, what tech working for whose purposes with what goals? And we can get to a different kind of tech. And with all of the 11 other factors that are invading our attention that I write about in Stolen Focus, we can change these factors, because you're absolutely right, Crystal, that at the moment, all of these apps are designed around one thing. It's very simple. The business model is the more frequently you pick up your phone and the longer you scroll, the more money they make. That's it. Just like KFC wants you to eat fried chicken. All of these companies, all of their algorithms, all of their engineering power is built very simply, and they admit this, some of them, around getting you to pick up your phone more often and scroll longer. And they have developed a genius array of techniques to make us do that. So what we've got to do is go after that particular business model, what Professor Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. We've got to just ban it, right? We ban lead in paint. We can ban that business model. We can force these companies to move to different business models that can begin to respect your attention. I go through this in much more detail in the book. And with all of these factors, think about the fact the way we eat is profoundly damaging our ability to focus and attention because of the food industry. And I go through lots of ways this is happening, but I'll give you just one example. Imagine you have the standard American British breakfast, what I grew up eating, I'm pretty sure you guys did, sugary cereal and white bread. What that does is it releases, not together, that would be weird. What that does is it releases a huge amount of glucose very quickly into your brain, huge energy surge, you feel like you've woken up, it's great. And then a couple of hours later, you're sitting at your desk, or your kid is sitting at their desk, and you get a huge energy slump, and you get brain fog, where you just can't think very clearly until you have another sugary, carby snack. The diet we eat puts us on a roller coaster of energy spikes and energy crashes, which causes patches of brain fog throughout the day. The way one leading nutritionist, Dale Pinnock, put it to me, it's like we're putting rocket fuel into a Mini. It'll go really fast for 5 minutes, then it will just stop. This is one of many ways the way we eat is damaging our attention. And again, this is highly unusual. No humans have ever eaten the way we eat. If you eat food that releases energy steadily throughout the day, as almost all humans before us did, you'll be able to pay attention in a better way. But you're right, and so much of your show is about exposing these corporate forces. One of the things that worries me is when people hear that about food, often they think, I'm doing something wrong. No, the entire food supply industry has changed in a way that harms our attention. More 18-month-old children know what the McDonald's M means than know their own last name. We've got to take on these big forces. And I argue in the book that just like we needed, and of course still need, a feminist movement to reclaim women's bodies and lives, we need an attention movement to reclaim our mind. We need to shift our consciousness. We need to stop doing what I did and what you did, which is when we can't focus, primarily blaming ourselves. I used to say to myself, you don't have enough willpower. You're not strong enough. You're not good enough. No, this is being done to all of us. Professor Joel Nigg, one of the leading experts on children's attention problems, said to me, we need to ask if we're living in what we call an attentional pathogenic environment. One where all of us are struggling with this. And to deal with that, we've got to change our psychology. We are not medieval peasants begging at the court of King Zuckerberg for a few little crumbs of attention from his table. We are the free citizens of democracies, and we own our own minds, and we can take them back from the forces that are corrupting our minds and our kids' minds. But we're going to have to fight for it, because we're in a race, right? On the one hand, you've got all these forces that are on the current trajectory only going to become more powerful. Paul Graham, one of the biggest investors in Silicon Valley, said the world will become more addictive in the next 40 years than it was in the last 40. Think about how much more addictive TikTok is to a child than Facebook was, right? That's one trajectory. That's one side of the race. On the other side, there's got to be all of us who, like in the historical precedent with lead, say, no, you don't get to do this to us. You don't get to do this to our children. We don't want to live this way. We don't want to have lives where the average office worker only focuses for 3 minutes. We don't want to have a life deprived of depth, deprived of the ability to achieve our goals, to think. No, we choose a different life. But we're only going to get that if we fight for it.
Wow. Really, I feel inspired. I hope everybody else can too. Look, we're going to have a link down there in the description, Johan. Thank you so much for joining us. You just laid out the case so well. So thank you so much.
What brings you out to Freedom Con?
The common assumption of the United States is that the country is the most strategically blessed in the world. From a geographical standpoint, the United States sits in an invaluable position. Not only is its vast territory filled with lush forests and land perfect for agriculture, but it is also rich in oil and mineral wealth, with internal waterways and protected harbors that give a natural advantage transporting these goods. Externally, the U.S. only has land borders.
What was life goes in medieval times.
I want tobacco.
Maybe it shouldn't be surprising that writers give so many superheroes, alien beings, and magical creatures the power of telepathy. Just imagine what you could learn about a person if you could hear their thoughts. Well, actually, I've just made a bit of an assumption there, that there would be something to hear. Because not everyone has that kind of internal monologue, or what psychologists often refer to as inner speech. And even people who do hear their thoughts don't necessarily talk in their heads 24/7. It turns out that inner speech could tell us a lot about how our brains work, how they develop, and how we speak. But research on all of this is really just getting started. Inner speech is somewhat loosely defined as when a person speaks meaningful thoughts without producing sound or moving any part of their body, like their tongue or their lips. So in some ways, it's easier to define by what it isn't. It's different from visualizing or picturing things in your head, and it does not include feelings like happiness or hunger, or your awareness of sensory experiences like noticing the glint of something shiny on the ground. So basically, it only refers to thoughts accompanied by specific words. These words usually have the same tone, inflection, and even accent that they would if they were spoken aloud, though not always, which we'll get to in a bit. Even figuring that much out about inner speech was somewhat of a challenge for psychologists because, surprise, it's really hard to measure people's internal experiences. So there's been a lot of variation in research methods and not a lot of agreement between different studies and different scientists. For example, some studies have tried to see inside people's heads by prompting them to hear specific words or phrases in their mind, like by asking them to read something silently or determine if two words rhyme without saying them out loud. That's revealed some weird quirks about inner speech, like that when people read, they're actually much more likely to mentally say single words that represent a passage than every word of every sentence. But prompted inner speech and spontaneous inner speech
aren't really the same. Plus, prompts can't tell us much about how frequently or why people use inner speech in their daily life. So some researchers use questionnaires instead. According to those, these conversations we have with ourselves are generally about ourselves and kind of in a bad way. Most of the time, our inner speech consists of negative things about ourselves, our negative emotions, or us trying to decide if we're good enough. And weirdly enough, that is all usually in full sentences. Only about 1/3 of people experience abbreviated inner speech, where a single word or phrase represents an entire complex thought. So the opposite of what happens when we read. Questionnaires have also tried to get to the question of how often people engage in inner speech, but they have a few limitations. Perhaps the most glaring is that people generally aren't great at being aware of their inner experiences. So questionnaires probably overestimate the frequency of inner speech. More recently, researchers have started using a procedure called descriptive experience sampling, or DES, instead. With DES, people carry a beeper that goes off randomly throughout the day. And when it does, they write down some notes about exactly what was going on in their head at that moment. It's like when you're sitting across from your friend and you're like, what you thinking about? It's not perfect. Some researchers think that DES goes too far and underestimates inner speech, for example. But it is giving scientists a better sense of how many people hear their thoughts and how often. And it is revealed that inner monologues, like most things in psychology, are on a spectrum. Very few people have no inner speech at all, and very few people engage in it 100% of the time. DES studies suggest that 70 to 85% of people experience some kind of spontaneous inner speech, at least occasionally. And of those people, most of them are talking to themselves about 15 to 30% of the time. It's also possible to have more than one internal experience simultaneously. So you might be visualizing something and talking to yourself about it. And inner speech varies in other ways too. While a lot of people talk about this in terms of internal monologues, about 75% of people report that sometimes they're having back and forths in their head. They usually play both parts in the conversation, though. Only about 25% of people report that other people show up in their inner speech. People who have ever had an imaginary friend are more likely to use this kind of dialogic speech, even if they don't have that friend anymore, which is pretty cute. Others might experience something a little different but similar, what psychologists call imagined interaction. Basically, that's when you imagine all the things you should have said to that guy who stole your parking spot, or rehearse what you're going to say to your date later. What's not clear in all of this is why people have these different inner monologues or dialogues and what those differences say about them. We don't even really know where inner speech comes from. From an evolutionary standpoint, many experts think that inner speech came about as part of the process for generating overt speech. It may even be a side effect of sorts of spoken language that's been co-opted for other cognitive tasks. See, when you go to speak, your brain simultaneously sends signals to two different areas. One to motor parts of your brain to control the mouth and the tongue and stuff, and a copy to the sensory parts of the brain. The sensory signal allows the brain to make a prediction about what it's about to hear. Essentially, you recite the words in your head as you say them out loud. And it turns out that the same kind of signal occurs during inner speech. That may be why you can, quote, hear yourself. You're literally activating the hearing part of your brain. And some psychologists think this means the underlying purpose of internal speech is to catch errors when you talk. If the internal prediction matches what you say, your brain knows it can filter your words out of what it's hearing and focus on the rest of the sounds coming in. If they don't match, like if you stumble over a word, your brain lets you know that you made a mistake so that you can stop and correct yourself. But it doesn't seem like this error correction
Egypt, land of the Nile. By the 12th century BC, this place was already old. vast temple complexes and pyramids dominating the horizon.
Cool.
We are fearless. We never
Monuments to the power of kings who ruled over 1,000 years before. A different time, a different dynasty. In the intervening years, since those colossal edifices had been hewn into the landscape, Egypt had seen societal turmoil, outside invasion, and dark age. Yet, more than a millennia on, the same gods ruled over this land. A more or less similar culture held sway. And now, Egypt was no longer going it alone. One piece of a vast interconnected trade system, the tendrils of which reached all the way to the southern shores of Britain in the far north, to the mountains of Afghanistan and beyond in the east. The wealthiest and most stable system the world had ever seen. We know from a vast diplomatic library found at Amarna in Egypt, capital of the heretical pharaoh Akhenaten, that the great kings of this age regularly corresponded with one another, intermarrying, making trade deals, and very occasionally going to war. Organized campaigns fought primarily by charioteers, the tanks of the day, supported by masses of spearmen. Nearly 300 cuneiform letters written in Akkadian and Babylonian, the lingua franca of the day, being sent from one side of the world to the other for hundreds of years, from at least the 15th century BC, discovered at this one site alone.
Acadia, a small French colony that existed for about 150 years before it was swallowed up by events beyond its control. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about this early settlement that existed in the maritime provinces of Canada between the years 1604 and 1755. We're going to talk about the people who settled there, their way of life, and Acadia's cruel demise and deportation during the French and Indian War. My name is Mark Lamont, and I am a descendant of the Acadians. Acadia first became widely known to Americans after the publication of the poem Evangeline in 1847 by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Prior to Evangeline, Americans were taught that founded in Halifax, 1749 was the beginning of Nova Scotia. Not true. So to begin my presentation today, I want to read you the first paragraph of this poem. He who believed in affection that hopes and endures and is patient. He who believed in the beauty and strength of woman's devotion. List to the mournful tradition still sung by the pines of the forest. List to the tale of love in Acadie, almost unhappy. Evangeline is the story of a long-lost love in Acadia caused by the French and Indian War, but it begs the question, was Acadia the home unhappy? So where is Acadia where was Acadia? Here's a map showing the maritime provinces in Canada, and comprising of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Cape Breton. This is the area where the colony of French Acadia was located. Where does the name Acadia come from? First time that we see it on maps is in 1524, when the explorer Giovanni de Verrazzano put it on his map. He first discovered the eastern shore of North America. He thought it was so beautiful that he named it after the Greek word Acadia, which meant an idyllic place. Interestingly enough, the local population in Mi'kmaq, who had been there for many years, also were used the word Katy to describe that area. And Katy meant fertile land. So you'll see the French refer to this land as both Katy and Acadia interchangeably. But obviously both words refer to the beauty and idyllic nature of this area. This map of Poitou shows the area where the majority of the early Acadian immigrants came from. You can see La Rochelle in the middle of the map. And if you go there even today and drive on the countryside, you see a lot of the names that are commonly associated with Acadia. So who were the Acadians? The Acadians didn't write a lot about themselves. So be busy just trying to survive. There were a number of people who visited or were explorers or leaders who wrote about the Acadians. Here's a description by Sieur de Cadillac. And yes, that's who the Cadillac car is named after. They visited Acadia and gave a very glowing description of the Acadian men as well built, good height, would be accepted without difficulty as soldiers in a guards regiment, well proportioned, their hair usually blonde, robust, would endure great fatigue, and would be fine subjects of the game. Pretty positive description. We find other descriptions of the Acadians also with men such as named Charbois, Dubuque, Bourbonnois, Foucard, Cornwallis, Rameau, all wrote and provided information that give us an idea of what the Acadians were like, what they looked like, and how they lived. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is talk a little bit about this French colony, their farming practices, trade, fishing industry, church, and education, and start with farming in terms of talking about how the Acadians lived back in the 17th, 18th century. Acadians farmed like most other people in that time. That was the main way that people survived, made their living, and raised their families by having farms. Now, this is a picture of what's called the Melanson settlement. This is located not far from Port Royal. This drawing is based upon findings made in an archaeological dig done in the area. So this gives you a good idea of what the Acadian landscape looked like and what the Acadian farms looked like. Acadians grew a variety of grains and other foods on their farm. We know that they grew wheat, barley, rye, peas, corn, flax, hemp. We also did that in gardens that grew beets, carrots, parsnips, onions, chives, shallows, herbs.
The whole situation lasted about 10 minutes. And
The Freedom Convoy is mainstream, and it is uniting Canadians regardless of what Justin Trudeau or his cheerleaders in the legacy media have to say about it. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Hi, everyone, thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Now, I was originally going to talk about something else today. I had a different show planned. I had a different script planned out. I was going to talk about China. I was going to talk about the Conservatives and Aaron O'Toole. But I think that this story is just too important to let go. This Freedom Convoy, Freedom Rally that is going to be happening in Ottawa this weekend is picking up so much steam. It's growing. There's so much momentum. It is so exciting. It is so positive that I want to focus another day of the show on it and give you an update of what is happening and what is going on with this Freedom Convoy. Now, let me just tell you, it is incredibly heartwarming to see this uprising, to see these good-hearted, wonderful Canadian people coming together, the unity, the passion, the belief in a better and more free Canada. Now, the media will continue to mislead you. They'll continue to try to spin and try to tell you a story that just isn't true. They'll say that this is an angry mob, that these people are angry and resentful. They'll say that these working class truckers are part of some far-right ideology, that this is a political movement, and that they are extreme. But look, this is so far from the truth that it doesn't even sting. It just slides right off because the accusations are so far from the truth. Anybody paying attention, anybody watching the videos that are being streamed all over social media, the beautiful, uplifting message that's coming from this trucker convoy, they can tell that this isn't an angry movement. This isn't a fringe movement. This is a movement full of hope, full of courage, full of positivity and optimism for our future. These courageous Canadians are speaking for so many of us, and so many people are coming out and rallying around these wonderful people. They're trying.
So when you move to a new country, obviously you find a lot of differences. This video is about the banking system in Canada. There were a few things which were kind of shocking for us. So in this video, we'll be telling you the banking system in Canada and the things.
This is Place Royale, the most historic square in the entire city. Now, it is called Royale because of the statue of Louis XIV that's here, but that's not what makes it so historic. This spot where I'm standing is where Quebec City began in 1608.
That's right. This is where Samuel de Champlain established his colony here in the New World. Just off the square is the oldest stone church in North America.
If you need
the new governor from Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, who won a couple months ago. It was close. He defeated, what's his name? Who is that guy? The crazy guy with the dancing, and it looked like he was wearing lipstick. Who was the guy? He used to run the Democratic, I think he was the head of the DNC at one time. Guy was a nutbag. We'll get his name in a second. God.
Sending back an online order has.
Okay, let's move on. Some good.
The next stage of the game is all about transformation. It's in the intel.
Okay, let's move on. Some good news. You know, this is something we very rarely get to report here. So we compiled a bunch of stories where obviously we've talked a lot about the supply chain crisis, about semiconductors in particular, the chips which are going to run everything. They do determine our future. It's why you can't buy a new car right now. It's why right now in the United States we have a critical shortage, which I will get to. Well, that shortage, well, yes, it's been awful, and it has, driven prices up for millions and millions of people. It has made life more miserable, is at least forcing some companies in order to reconsider globalization and start trying to build things in America again. Look at that, Crystal. It turns out it was that simple the entire time. So let's put this up there on the screen. This is a first really good piece of news from the Detroit Free Press. GM is going to invest $7 billion in 4 facilities across Michigan, creating 4,000 jobs. 4,000 is a paltry sum compared to the millions that were lost to China after the entry into the WTO, but it's something. And even more important is that these $2.6 billion will be building a new battery factory actually in Lansing, Michigan, and $4 billion to convert an existing factory to make electric pickups. So making America the domestic future for electric vehicles, making it so that we can fulfill our destiny if we really do want to do something about our use of petroleum and try to transfer to an electric future. We are a decade or more behind China in terms of their domestic supply chain. This is what they were doing in 2008, 2009. So we have still a big catch up to do, but look, this is a real thing that I want to point to, give props to GM, props also to the people who, the union, which was involved as well. They're very, very happy about this. I think that's awesome. Let's put this next one up there on the screen. Another really good piece of news. I'll tell you why also I'm so excited about this one is Intel is investing $20 billion in an Ohio chip making facility. And what I'm really happy about in these two cases is that the two things that we just announced, they're not in the Sun Belt, in Arizona, in Texas, in Georgia, which, look, nothing against those states, but they've been doing a little bit too well. I'm joking, but that's where the population growth is coming. Some of the more downwardly mobile parts of the United States were being neglected. So to see Michigan and Ohio, the people there who suffered so much from globalization, to see these $27 billion of capital being injected into their states, this is great stuff. Also, because this is not only 3,000 permanent jobs in terms of the chip making facility and the eventual fab which will come, but it actually is going to bring in $100 billion over the next decade. And what did we learn with GM and the plant closures all throughout the mid 2000s? It's not just about the plants. There's stuff around them. There's the dry cleaner, which services the guys who work there. There's the restaurants. Then there are the people who sell the stuff to the GM plant, the raw inputs. The more of that we onshore bring into the domestic supply chain, number one, we rule our future. It's not acceptable to be reliant upon a foreign rival power in order to power the technology that we need in order to, number one, be competitive, but two, to live. And then the third is that we need to at least forge a way that you don't have to be in the information economy. The information economy is not for everybody, and that's fine. And you shouldn't have to be relegated to serfdom in serving the people in the information economy in order to survive. So this is exactly what's missing from the U.S. economy right now. It is, look, it's not enough. We lost hundreds of billions, so this is 27 billion, but it's something, and it makes it so that other companies can follow suit. I also want to give props to the Biden administration. They did, praise Intel, all of that. Thank you, by the way. This is exactly what the government should be doing. So 2 pieces of really good news that we have.
Yeah, on the Michigan GM news too, it's unclear in Ohio, but these will be union jobs, and that
GM, exactly.
That matters a lot as well. We got some numbers.
One of whom, and I'm not saying who, has a breakthrough case. Not of COVID though, relax, of smallpox, so it's completely fine. And we're going to dive straight in tonight with Texas, a state so big it has 3 official state mammals, 2 of which can go fuck themselves, and exactly one of which is the armadillo, which is the perfect animal. For starters, it looks like a possum who worked at medieval times, plus armadillos can roll up in a pool whenever they are scared, plus they sleep for 16 hours a day, which, relatable, and some scream like this to scare off predators. Good boy, you tell them. Sadly though, tonight cannot be all fun armadillo facts because Texas is currently reeling from an incredibly draconian new abortion law.
Abortion providers in Texas have started turning away patients. The state's new abortion law took effect at midnight.
The Texas law bans abortion after about 6 weeks of pregnancy, when a so-called fetal heartbeat is detected. A controversial term because of how undeveloped the embryo is at that stage. The law makes no exception for rape or incest.
The new Texas law does not allow state officials to enforce the ban. Instead, it lets private citizens sue anyone who who helped a woman violate the law for $10,000.
Yeah, it's true. Private citizens can now sue others for aiding in an abortion, whether they're a doctor, a clinic worker, or even an Uber driver who took someone to the clinic, meaning that this law has somehow managed to do the impossible and make being an Uber driver even worse. Hey, you don't get health insurance, people are going to be assholes to you, and now you might also have a cash bounty on your head. Now get out there and beg for stars. After the law went into effect last week, the Supreme Court made a major step to intervening, something that was such a huge piece of news, even TMZ had to weigh in.
The Supreme Court could have blocked this because if any law seems counter to Roe versus Wade, it would seem to be this. The fact that they were completely silent on this just speaks volumes.
It speaks volumes, and the real world impact of this in Texas is 85 to 90% of abortions in Texas happen at the 6-week or later mark.
Most women don't know they're pregnant within the 6-week period.
Right. And the way that Roe worked was it was about viability of the fetus. It was 22 to 24 weeks. That's a massive period of time in which women were having legal abortions. Now in Texas, if you get sued under this law and you lose, they can shut down your clinic.
They shut down the clinic.
They shut the clinic down.
What the fuck? Congratulations, Texas. I think you just broke TMZ. They shouldn't be having to cover this story. They should be doing what they do best, gathering around in a circle of America's worst bachelor and bachelorette party attendants while Harvey hydrates from a large container, and they all dissect something like whether or not Katherine Heigl's dog got butt implants. You know what they're good at? That guy in shorts shouldn't be having to talk about fetal viability. But you know what? I guess if he's doing my job, I get to do his for the rest of tonight, asking him which hot Hollywood hunk has these summer-ready abs. And guys, it's Wallace Shawn. You know what? This is better. It's a better show. This law will have catastrophic effects, providers say that it would have prevented at least 85% of the procedures previously completed in the state. And when Governor Abbott was pressed on why he signed a bill that would essentially force survivors of rape or incest to carry a pregnancy to term, his response was something.
Let's make something very clear. Rape is a crime, and Texas will work tirelessly to make sure that we eliminate all rapists from the streets of Texas by aggressively going out and arresting them, prosecuting them, and getting them off the streets.
Oh, fuck off. Just fuck right off. Set aside you're announcing we'll arrest rapists like it's a brand new idea when you're Tim Cook unveiling a new iPhone. We could talk about how Abbott clearly doesn't understand that it's not just scary, faceless criminals on the street perpetuating rapes, but most often it's actually someone known to the victim. We can talk about how arresting rapists doesn't actually fix the problem of women needing legal, safe abortions. We can even talk about the myriad of reasons women get abortions and how framing the issue around the most horrific situations just further demonizes the procedure. But honestly, it might really just be quicker to say, fuck off, Greg, as shorthand for all the other stuff you don't have time to get into. Now, thankfully, people are pushing back hard. On Thursday, the DOJ announced that it was suing Texas, calling the law an unprecedented scheme to evade judicial review, which it very much is. And when a pro-life group set up a website where people could report violations of the new law, people started quickly flooding it with tips like claiming the fictional characters in Marvel's Avengers were apparently seeking abortions, which, at the very least, is a hell of a pitch for an episode of What If? And some went with an even blunter approach.
On the website for like anonymously snitching on people who break the Texas Heartbeat Act, you can attach any file you want to it. So I just sent them a bunch of Shrek porn.
Yeah. TikTok users bombard anti-abortion websites with Shrek porn. It's one of those sentences I never thought I'd have to say. Like, everyone needs to stop talking about Kim Jong-un's sexy bod, and Ben Affleck looks so happy right now. Look, fucking with pro-lifers on TikTok is clearly funny, but it's not going to roll back this law. And Texas seems to be facing few consequences for what it's done. When Greg Abbott was asked whether he worried that the law would deter investment in the state, he said, you need to understand that there's a lot of businesses and a lot of Americans who like the social positions that the state of Texas is taking. And the thing is, so far, much of corporate America has decided to not weigh in on this, a stark contrast with their recent willingness to speak out on racial justice, voting rights, and other social issues. And it's not just silence here. A major donor to the sponsors and co-sponsors of this bill is a political action committee belonging to AT&T, who, pending approval of our sale to Discovery, are still technically our business daddy. So we asked them to comment on this, and they told us AT&T has never taken a stance on abortion, an amazing sentence, and employee PAC contributions to Texas legislators went to both supporters and opponents of the Texas legislation. And listen, not taking a stance on this issue right now is taking a stance. And both citing abortion isn't really the PR slam dunk that they seem to think it is, although it is certainly on brand for them. AT&T clearly likes their public statements the same way that they like their cell signal, hilariously fucking weak. The fight to undermine the constitutional right to abortion is not just happening in Texas. The Supreme Court will hear arguments about a Mississippi anti-abortion law later this year that is a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade. This is not a hypothetical debate, but the latest escalation in the ongoing attack on reproductive rights. And I don't really have the words to express how infuriating that is right now. But maybe this sums things up best. Yeah, well said, buddy. And now this.
And now, yet again, it's that time of year.
Well, a fan favorite at Starbucks is back, whether you like it or not. The coffee chain is bringing back its pumpkin spice latte.
Eric said if pumpkins are just coming into season now, what is being used as that pumpkin spice flavor? You know, for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And my response to him was, I don't care.
I think they're terrible.
I love pumpkin. I love coffee.
Me too.
I would have them together, but don't stick them in each other.
Right.
Stick them in each other! Stick the coffee in the pumpkin! Give the pumpkin in the milk! Shove it all into my wretched lungs so that I might breathe deliciously!
Check it out. Now Bud Light is rolling out a pumpkin spice hard seltzer.
Actually, can we come for a second? Bud Light. Bud Light seltzer? Why would you do that, man? I don't understand. This isn't fun anymore. You ruined it. It was perfect.
Our main story tonight concerns Belarus. And I know you might be expecting me to play that game where I tell you that's not actually Belarus, it's somewhere else. But here's the thing. That game was supposed to encourage you to learn some basic geography. And honestly, I started to get the sense that some of you just grew to enjoy being humiliated by it. To what those particular people will be happy to know that that's not actually Belarus, that's Belarus. Happy now, you freaks? Specifically, we'd like to talk about Belarus's president and autocratic leader, Alexander Lukashenko, who has had quite a year. In fact, you might have noticed stories about Belarus popping up with increasing regularity, especially since last August, when they had a highly contested election which made international headlines.
Thousands of people unleashing their fury in the capital city of Minsk and elsewhere also around the country. Mr. Lukashenko, who has ruled for nearly 3 decades, has faced a wave of anger over his handling of the coronavirus pandemic and the economy as well. Despite that, official state-approved exit polls gave him an overwhelming majority of 80%.
It's true, they claimed Lukashenko won with 80% of the vote, which was immediately fishy for a couple of reasons. One, the massive protest that followed, and two, the idea that any man could still be popular after nearly 3 decades in the public eye. I've only had this show for 8 years, and even I can barely stand the sight of me. And Belarusians aren't just furious at Lukashenko for his handling of the coronavirus, although from the beginning of the pandemic, his mismanagement of it was incredibly reckless.
At first, he called the virus a psychosis and said it was treatable with vodka and saunas. And at a crowded hockey game, he denied its existence.
I don't understand. There are no viruses here. Did you see any of them flying around?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that makes makes sense, doesn't it? Just look around you. You don't see any COVID viruses, do you? Do you hear any Ebola? Smell any measles? Taste any AIDS in the air? No, of course not. That's how you know they're not here. What is here is your fearless leader who's about to go and score a hat-trick for the Minsk midlife crises. Lukashenko's terrible handling of COVID is just the beginning here. He's described himself as the last and only dictator in Europe, which is, in itself, just an amazing thing to say. Bragging about being the last dictator. He's not bragging about being the last Radio Shack or the last person to make a movie with Harvey Weinstein. It's not an enviable title. And sadly, for some Belarusians, he is the only leader they've ever known.
How old are you? I am 20. You're 22. Yeah. Your life, yeah, they've under one president. How does that feel for you? Well, it feels like shit.
Yeah, I bet it does. Especially since the person who's been in charge for that man's entire life is a hard-boiled egg with a mustache who calls himself a dictator and thinks COVID only exists if he can see it zooming around in a tiny little jet. That process was from last September, and things have only escalated since then. You may remember a Belarusian athlete refusing to return home during the Tokyo Olympics, and back in May, this happened.
This morning, Belarus is facing growing international protests and condemnation after the country's president, Alexander Lukashenko, sent a fighter jet to ground a commercial plane flying between two European capitals. And with it, 26-year-old dissident journalist Roman Protasevich and his girlfriend. One passenger says Roman pleaded, "Don't do this, they'll kill me." The Ryanair crew replied, "We have no choice."
Yeah. A journalist who was critical of the government briefly passed through Belarusian airspace on a commercial flight, so Lukashenko personally ordered a fighter jet to intercept it and force it to land. Now, because of threats from Hamas, but that email was sent 24 minutes after they informed the pilot about the bomb threat. Not to mention, it was sent from Ahmed Ilanov 1988 at protonmail.com with the subject line Allahu Akbar, which is just impossibly lazy. It's just one step above emailing from badguy6969 at yahoo.com with a subject line terrorists parentheses like 9/11. So given how much things seem to be spiraling in Belarus, we thought tonight it'd be worth giving you some context for what is happening over there and taking a look at exactly who Alexander Lukashenko is. And let's start with the fact that he is the greatest president in the history of Belarus, specifically because he's the only president in the history of Belarus. Lukashenko won the country's first free and fair election in 1994, 3 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, when he, a former manager of a state-owned farm, vowed to raise taxes on the rich and defeat corruption. It sounded great, and he was genuinely popular at the time. Just listen to a former aide-turned-critic recall how people reacted to Lukashenko at his rallies.
The 3,000 people who were listening to him, instead of leaving the stadium, moved towards him like an avalanche. I remember as if it happened yesterday. They were reaching out to him like believers to a relic, praying for God's grace. Women were lifting up their children for Lukashenko to touch them. Others were reaching out with books, newspapers, or even banknotes just to get his autograph. Well, Lukashenko was no Michael Jackson, but this is what really happened.
Well, hold on there, because was he no Michael Jackson? Think about it. Lukashenko was immensely popular in the 90s. Die-hard fans packed stadiums to see him, and he eventually torpedoed his reputation because it turns out he was an absolute monster. To be honest, I think Lukashenko fully earns that comparison. And he still very much plays up his humble farm background through photos like this one, where he's harvesting potatoes while dressed like Chef Boyardee at an orgy. He once gave 4 bags of potatoes and a tub of lard to Vladimir Putin as a Christmas gift. And when Steven Seagal visited Belarus, Lukashenko also gifted him produce, with the Washington Post poetically writing at the time, "There was no hesitation on Steven Seagal's face as he took a raw, freshly peeled carrot from the hands of the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, and bit into it with a satisfying chomp." Which is just an elegant tapestry of words. You don't even need a video to imagine what it was like to see Steven Seagal using his mouth bones to break off the tip of that rabbit hole. But, you know what? We're going to show it to you anyway. Magnificent. Look, no disrespect to Seagal old classics like Under Siege, Hard to Kill, Above the Law, and probably something called Hunting the Fire or whatever. But that is the greatest film Steven Seagal has ever made. But for all Lukashenko's common man posturing, his promises to combat corruption quickly fell apart. Just 5 months into his presidency, a deputy compiled an investigation into corruption in Parliament, which was said to have contained charges against various high-ranking officials. But the government banned all press coverage of the report, to the point where local newspapers that had planned to publish the results of it instead ended up publishing blank pages like these. And that was just the beginning of a decades-long assault on the press. Shortly afterward, Lukashenko replaced the editors-in-chief of 4 leading newspapers and took the national radio and television under strict control, creating environments so hostile to independent journalism. Belarus is now considered the most dangerous country in Europe for members of the media, with members constantly subjected to violence, arbitrary detentions, interrogations, raids, and more. And the control Lukashenko exerts over even small, petty details is incredible.
Is it true that you cannot film the back of Lukashenko's head?
Yes, it's true.
Is it because he has a bald patch, or?
Yeah, it's a kind of very weird haircut, so it's growing from one side.
Wait a minute. Hold on there. You're telling me this guy is bald? This guy? This man right here? You're telling me that this guy is bald? Bald, you say? You know what? I think you might actually be right. He looks like he kind of grew his left sideburn into a rat tail and then shellacked it onto his bare scalp. The answer to the question, is Lukashenko bald at this point, is a resounding, oh, I wish. His bizarre behaviour goes well beyond censoring the media and force-feeding Steven Seagal raw vegetables. Over the years, he's made statements like, better to be a dictator than gay, and not everything connected in Germany with the well-known Adolf Hitler was bad. Really taking the phrase playing devil's advocate a bit too literally. And if you're thinking, okay, but who didn't actually praise Hitler in the 90s first? Why are you thinking that? And second, just this summer, he said the entire world grovels to the Jews, which is obviously awful. Lukashenko treats anti-Semitism the way fashion treats low-rise bottoms. He keeps in it back, but it was never acceptable at any point in history. Overall, it seems Lukashenko operates from the standard authoritarian playbook, and he's repeatedly worked to codify his power, using a controversial referendum in 1996 to extend his first term and dramatically increase his powers and weaken those of the legislature, and then using a second referendum to completely remove term limits in 2004. At this point, outside observer groups have reported that none of his last 5 election victories have been legitimate. And throughout his time as president, Lukashenko clamped down hard on the slightest signs of dissent. In 2012, 2 men staged toy protests with stuffed animals holding anti-Lukashenko slogans. Objectively, the cutest display of civil disobedience that I've ever seen. But how about getting both of those men sentenced to 10 days in jail? A sentence that in itself actually inspired a follow-up protest.
In July, hundreds of teddy bears rained down Belarus. They wore parachutes and carried pro-democracy messages. The man behind the prank is a marketing executive with a Swedish firm. She took off from Lithuania in this tiny plane. For 90 minutes, she let the fur fly.
Perfect. I love it. 10 out of 10 there. We should be dropping parachuting teddy bears in the sky here all the time, not even as an act of protest. It should just be a thing that we do. Oh, it's 1 p.m, everyone. It's daily parachuting teddy bear time. Why did we even invent planes if we're not going to use them to drop teddy bears out of the sky and instantly improve everybody's day? I don't understand the society we built for ourselves. We are fucking idiots. Unsurprisingly, Lukashenko tried to cover that incident up, which proved to be impossible due to, the existence of the internet. So instead, he tried to save face by firing 2 generals, the head of the border service and the head of the Air Force. But the thing is, even though protests like those can be whimsical, what happens to dissidents in Belarus is absolutely horrific. Opposition figures have disappeared over the years, and some are suspected of being murdered by the state. And there have been numerous allegations of political detainees being tortured, as this BBC journalist once tried to demonstrate in what I will say is a pretty bold manner.
The opposition in Belarus say they were tortured by being forced to strip naked in freezing conditions. So we go to a Coles store in North London where the temperature is minus 24 Celsius.
So the guards forced the prisoners to strip naked and stand in this position, spread eagled. In minus 20, there was snow outside.
In the job of torture, this is a stress position.
Quick question, and it actually has nothing to do with the prisoner torture. Why did you do that? You could have told us the prisoners were forced to stand in the cold naked. We'd have believed you, and we'd have been able to imagine what that looks like. We really didn't need to see you standing there, cakes out, to get your very basic point. And the thing is, that brutality has only escalated. Recently, Lukashenko has increased the number of arrests of human rights activists and journalists, and police have raided their offices and homes. Just this week, an opposition leader was sentenced by the state to 11 years in prison. And even when dissidents manage to escape Belarus, they may not be safe. A few weeks ago, an activist who fled to Ukraine went out for a run and was found hanged in a park. And while that has not yet been officially confirmed as a murder, come on. I'm not sure which species of trees are native to Ukraine, but I don't think any of them naturally have Belarusian dissidents hanging from them. The point here is, for nearly 3 decades now, Belarus has experienced a brutal cycle of oppression in which Lukashenko wins elections that are neither free nor fair, locks up his political opponents, people take to the streets in protest, and he violently cracks down. It is no wonder the Belarusian people seem to have had enough. A leaked poll shows that only about a third of the population trusts Lukashenko, which is impressively low. Considering, remember, he controls the national media. And even there, his grip seems to be slipping though. Last year, presented on a state TV morning show, walked off and resigned, leaving viewers watching this. Wow, that is both a brave act of protest by Belarusian broadcasters and also everyone's dream panel on The View. And you do get the sense Lukashenko may be starting to feel some pressure here, because when marchers likened him to a cockroach and online polls showed him having only 3% support from his people, instead of simply ignoring that, this is how he responded.
Do you really believe that the serving president has just 3% support? Stop harassing and insulting us, calling me a mustached cockroach, etc. I am still the president of this country. In no country in the world are you allowed to insult people.
Yes, you are. Yeah, you definitely are. I'll prove it to you. Your suit's too big, you suck at hockey, and whatever it is you do with your hair isn't fucking working. See? Not in jail. I'm not in jail. Things are clearly bleak in Belarus, and Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the woman widely believed to be the real winner of last year's election, and who, by the way, only ran after her husband, Lukashenko's initial opponent, was imprisoned, has fled the country, but she is still leading the country's pro-democracy movement from exile. She's asked world leaders to demand the release of what is thought to be over 650 political prisoners. And I will say, the EU, the US, the UK and Canada have imposed sanctions on Belarus, targeting everything from close associates of Lukashenko to the Belarusian economy. And the Biden administration has just recently imposed more. But the truth is, sanctions can only do so much here. And Lukashenko does not seem keen to end his reign. Many think that he's groomed his youngest son, Kolya, to take his place, because since he was young, Lukashenko's been dragging him along everywhere he goes on state business. Here he is. Here he is again. Here he is again. He is in all of these photos. I don't know exactly when European Bring Your Kid to Work Day is, but it can't be always. So at this point, it looks like the only thing that will really improve things in Belarus is if the people there somehow manage to reform their constitution and ensure that free and fair elections are finally held. And as we have seen tonight, fighting for those changes is going to be incredibly risky. But there may be one extremely small way that we can actually help here, or if not help, at least annoy the shit out of Lukashenko. Because if there is one thing that we know he hates, other than gay people, Jews, his old bald head, and anyone who disagrees with him. It is teddy bears, and frankly, why wouldn't he? I mean, look at them. They're everything that he's not. Cute, lovable, and covered in thick, natural hair all the way around. So, let's be decided to our own special teddy bear in his honor. As you can see, he's wearing a shirt with Farmer Lukashenko's favourite vegetables in a totally random configuration. If you think they look like something else, what does that say about you? And instead of dropping them from a plane over Belarus, we're actually offering them to you at this website, belarusbearforce.com, for the price of $19.99. We partnered with Global Giving to give 100% of sales to organisations fighting for the freedom of the press and human rights for the people of Belarus. So please, buy one of these bears, and not just for the people of Belarus, but for my sake too. We bought 10,000 of these things, and if we don't get rid of all of them, I'm in real shit. Go to belarusbearforce.com, buy one for yourself, your parents, at least politically worker, or your friend's new baby who you have no idea what to get because it's not like you've ever hung out with it before. So be sure to order your teddy bear today and support the people of Belarus. I promise you, they are flight. That is our show. Thank you so much for watching. It's great to be back. Good night. It's raining bears.
Well, hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's great to be with you on this Wednesday, January 26th. Here's some of what we're talking about tonight. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer will step down after more than a quarter century on the bench. We'll get to know him in his own words.
I grew up in San Francisco. I lived most of my life in Massachusetts. I run into differences among people, but I never saw differences until I got to Washington.
We'll also consider who President Biden might pick to succeed Justice Breyer. We don't have names, but we have had hints.
The president has stated and reiterated his commitment to nominating Black women to the Supreme Court, and certainly stands by that.
Also, we'll look at the damage misinformation is doing to our public trust in news, including las noticias en español. Jose Diaz-Balart joins us to help tell truth from fiction in Spanish-language news. And a trending topic on TikTok raises ethical questions about naming and shaming. We'll explain the saga of Les Taylor and why some of the women he dated are calling him out. So much to talk about tonight. Let's begin with what has been the top story on NBCNews.com for much of today. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer is retired.
Union training, the explicit goal is to kill the union. It'd be like taking a dog training class from Cruella de Vil. No, not the one that's a misunderstood bohemian or whatever. I'm talking about the real Cruella. Yeah, that one, the original doggicidal bad bitch. Now, these mandatory propaganda sessions are called captive audience meetings, and most Amazon workers at Best Buy are having to attend at least 2 per week, and that is not uncommon. Nearly 90% of employers facing union campaigns hold captive audience meetings. Right now, Starbucks is facing a union drive at 6 of its stores in Buffalo, and it has been doing everything that you've seen so far, sending anti-union text messages, putting up signs, and holding captive audience meetings. And it may be no coincidence that Amazon's and Starbucks tactics are pretty similar, because both hired union-busting law firms and consultants to help them with their campaigns, which is not unusual. Union busting is a whole industry. There are now about 2,000 of these firms, some of which have euphemistic names like the Labour Relations Institute. And 75% of companies facing organised drives hire one, spending nearly $340 million on them per year. And these firms offer different levels of services for companies on a budget. Some offer mass-produced anti-union videos. You can even buy this one, featuring a cartoonishly overbearing union organizer shot against a green screen so that you can customize it based on your workplace. They even produce samples of what that could look like.
Listen, just sign the card. Once a union gets in, you want to be on the good side. Listen, just sign the card. Once a union gets in, you want to be on the good side. Listen, just sign the card. Once a union gets in, you want to be on the good side.
Well, I'll say this, at least they chose outfits that would fit in any workplace, because we all know employees in both corporate offices and warehouses dress like a college football coach whose wife just left him, and an America's Next Top Model contestant before the makeover. Although the backdrops could clearly have been more creative there, you've got a green screen. The world is your oyster. Why not show evil unionizers mobilizing on a roller coaster, or on a tropical getaway, or on the desert planet of Arrakis? If you're going to force employees to watch your bullshit, at least take them on a cosmic journey with Sandy Softboy Space Jesus. But whether it is coming directly from a company or through an outside firm, anti-union campaigns tend to follow a pretty basic playbook, and a go-to tactic is to highlight that unions collect dues. It's a point that Delta Airlines made when its employees were considering unionizing, and they did it in a pretty dickish way.
To airlines, causing a lot of turbulence on the ground after it told employees to buy video games instead of unionizing. One poster, here it is, says union dues cost around $700 a year, and then tells employees to put their money towards a video game system with the latest hits.
Oh, the latest hits, you say? Telling your workers to play video games instead of unionizing is incredibly condescending, and doubly so when you consider video game characters are the ultimate example of exploited labor. Think about it. They take orders all day, usually get paid in coins, and not once in 36 years of playing Mario have I ever seen him get to take a bathroom break. Not once. The Mushroom Kingdom has to be absolutely littered with piss bottles at this point. And you might say, well, of course a union collects dues. How else are they going to have the resources to fight for their members? But these consulting firms will insist that unions simply take money and offer nothing in return. Here is how the Labour Relations Institute puts it in one of its union-busting videos.
Unions are in trouble. Their membership is shrinking, which means they're in danger of going out of business. They send out high-pressure salespeople to sell a bill of goods that most people believe is either of no real value or is highly overpriced.
Okay, so just to be clear, that is a for-profit consulting firm being paid by a for-profit company arguing that unions are only in it for the money. That is pretty fantastic. It's not even the pot calling the kettle black, it's the pot calling the kettle a pot. It's like being called a bad first date by Ted Bundy. Now, NRO consultants have also told employees that joining a union might get them a contract with less wages and less benefits than they currently have. But think about how ridiculous that argument is. If companies genuinely thought unions would negotiate worse terms for their employees, they'd be welcoming them in with open arms. Jeff Bezos would have shown up to that interview in a Che Guevara t-shirt if he thought it would help him pay people less. Because the truth here is, unionized workers in the private sector have wages about 25% higher than their non-union counterparts. That is why companies want to keep unions out. That is why they're willing to pay LRI $3,000 per consultant per day. But the anti-union argument isn't just that they are useless, it's that they'll destroy the beautiful workplace culture that companies have created. Here is how Target framed it in one of their union-busting videos.
If the unions did try to organize Target team members, they could also try and bring along their way of doing business, an old-fashioned, rigid structure. No one knows exactly what could happen. There are lots of examples of how rigid grocery store union contracts could hurt our store's ability to serve guests.
Here's what we mean. Let's say you're working in stationery, but you're walking through domestics on your way to check on something. A guest stops for help. What would you do? Without even thinking about it, you stop and give them any assistance they required. But what if union work rules say you can't work outside of your department? What do you tell the guest? Sorry, I can't help you. That makes you look bad. But more importantly, it means our guest doesn't get immediate attention. They might not come back. So everyone gets hurt. Everyone except the union.
Ooh, I like how they put that last part in black and white so we know it's bad. We're talking can't open a jar bad. There's got to be a better way. If I can just give the target executives one quick note. Have you ever worked retail? Because if you had, you would know that telling your floor workers they'd be able to tell a customer, fuck off, this isn't my department, is a pretty good argument to vote yes on that union. Honestly, that might be worth it on its own. And one side note, those aren't just actors, they're union actors, members of the Screen Actors Guild. In fact, that man later actually stressed in an interview that he's very much pro-union, defending his appearance in the video by saying, if someone hires me to play a rapist, does it make me a rapist? To which I have to respond, what? And yeah, I guess not, but what? But the most frightening and effective argument companies make against unions isn't just that they'll keep you from helping customers in other departments, it's that they'll cost you your job. Now, thankfully, it is against the law for companies to threaten workers that if they unionize, their workplace will close. However, hilariously, it is legal for them to predict that it will shut down, which is obviously not a real distinction. When a loan shark threatens to break your legs, that's not meaningfully different from a loan shark predicting that legs will be broken as a result of market forces relating to lack of payments. And that prediction loophole can let a lot through. For instance, Columbia Sportswear brought in a consultant who freestyles to a captive meeting of workers about what could happen if they unionize.
I've seen the worst of it. It doesn't always end up going so badly, but I mean, I've seen people, just completely bankrupted. Marriages lost, homes lost, company closing. Yeah, sometimes that happens too. I mean, look at Detroit. I mean, all the auto workers there. I mean, tens of thousands of employees lost their jobs overnight.
Wow. That is a level of fear-mongering rarely seen outside an abstinence-only sex ed class. Don't join a union unless you want to end up pregnant, divorced, homeless, and Detroit. And it's not just Columbia Sportswear. There was a tire company called Kumho unionized a few years back. 12 different managers issued threats to close the plant if the union won, which is undeniably scary. And the thing is, it worked, because even though 80% of Kumho signed cards supporting unionization, when the vote happened less than a month later, only 43% voted to organize. And that is the thing. Threats that a workplace will close are effective despite being overwhelmingly bullshit. One study found 51% of companies threatened to close plants if unions won, while just 1% actually closed operations after a union victory. It is the same story again and again and again, and it can be dispiriting for those who know just how much good a union could do for their co-workers. Listen to a woman who tried to organise her Nissan plant talk about how it felt watching her union drive fall apart.
When we started this, I mean, my whole line was just, they were just yes. But when they saw it, started bringing in those anti-union videos, I seen my co-workers just, the look on their face was dead. I just can't do it.
Yeah, and that is heartbreaking. And frustratingly, even on the rare occasion workers manage to overcome everything that you have seen tonight and win their election, the fight still might not be over. As the study found, in a quarter of all successful union elections, getting a contract can take 3 years or longer. And when companies are supposed to bargain in good faith, they can legally draw things out to a ridiculous degree. In 2009, some Texas employees at Dish Network voted to unionize, but over a decade later, they still have no contract. And think about how long ago 2009 was. Back then, the kids on Modern Family looked like actual children, and at that point, none of them were engaged to the bartender from the Bachelor franchise. In 2009, the question on everyone's lips was, is Degrassi really rapping? Is he really doing that? And you really want me to transport you back to that time? I've got 2 words for you. Susan Boyle. Remember how the whole thing was, we didn't expect someone who looked normal could sing good. The point here is, 2009 was a long time ago, and that is how ridiculously long employees at Dish Network have been waiting for a fair union contract. And that actually brings us to the final problem here, because far too often, the consequences for anti-union actions by companies are minimal to none. For instance, companies aren't supposed to retaliate against workers who unionize, but it happens all the time. Take Cynthia Harper, who worked at a factory that made windshields. After she spoke up in favor of a union, she had a pretty sudden, pretty suspicious change to her job.
Ever since they started this job, it's been a two-man job. When they put me out there on it, they decided they wanted it to be a one-person job. When we talked to HR, I told them they were targeting me, put me on a job to set me up to run up for performance issues and fire me.
Okay, that's pretty brazen, isn't it? They took a job clearly for two people and made her do it on her own. And if you're going to set her up for failure, why stop there? Why not just give her everyone's job? Why not send the entire factory home with a note saying, relax everyone, Cynthia's got this. And the thing is, she was right. Soon after that, she was fired along with two other pro-union co-workers. But the consequences for a company doing that are just pathetic. A company that wrongfully terminates a worker for supporting a union might be forced to provide back pay, but that on its own is a pretty small price for them to pay if it helps them crush a union. And other punishments are even weaker, like the fact, and this is true, a company can be ordered to post a notice on the bulletin board in which it admits that it violated the law, but also, and this is crucial, promises not to do it again. And come on! A company should probably face more consequences for illegally union busting than this dog who clearly likes to hunt this cat. And honestly, in both cases, I doubt the sign is going to change the underlying problematic behavior. So it is no wonder that US employers are charged with violating federal law in over 40% of all union election campaigns, because why wouldn't they? Even when those charges are proven, the consequences are large. One anti-union consultant has flat out stated, what happens if you violate the law? The probability is you will never get caught. If you do get caught, the worst thing that can happen to you is you get a second election and the employer wins 96% of second elections. And it's not great that union busting firms are telling companies that, but it's even worse that it's fucking true. So what can we do here? Well, Congress could step in to help rebalance the playing field. The Protecting the Right to Organise Act, or PRO Act, would outlaw captive audience meetings and enable successfully unionised workforces to seek arbitration to settle a first contract, meaning that companies like Dish can't give them the middle finger for decades. Also, and perhaps most importantly, it had put real financial penalties in place to prevent companies from violating workers' rights without consequence. But until that law is passed, and it should pass, one of the most important things for workers to do is to try not to get disheartened during a campaign, which I know isn't easy. But union busting is all about killing momentum, splintering unity, and exhausting worker spirit. So to the extent that it helps, if you're in a workplace that's unionizing right now and you're feeling pressured or personally attacked, remember, the company is almost certainly following a script, and you don't have to play the part that they want you to. And if by some chance you're a corporate executive who's made it this far into the show, first, I'm almost impressed that you're still here. But second, please stop wasting money on these anti-union consulting firms. Instead, just use this video that we made for you. It's a lot cheaper, and it says exactly what you really need.
Hello. Thanks for joining us today and watching this mandatory
You're here because someone may have approached you about unionizing.
or ask you to sign a union card.
Or simply said the words living wage out loud anywhere on company grounds.
Look, a union may work for a lot of places, but the thing is, here, we're a family, and you employees are children.
So let's listen in on some worker conversations.
Something we definitely don't do in real life.
Hey, Bob, did you know if we brought on a union, it'd be illegal for us to talk to our bosses anymore?
No way. There's two things I love in this world. Talking directly to my shift supervisor and helping customers who are in departments I don't work in.
Well, bad news, Bob. If the union came in, you couldn't do that. Yeah, if a customer who's outside of your department asks you a question, you're legally required to tell them to go fuck themselves. And if they ask you a follow-up question, you'd have to slap them with an open hand. So everyone gets hurt. Everyone except the union.
Wait, how could the union possibly benefit from something?
We don't think a union is right for our workplace, but ultimately, the choice is always up to our employees.
We promise no one will be fired for wanting to unionize. Although there's a chance you might be fired for poor attendance.
A pretty good chance, actually.
But you won't be fired explicitly for the union thing. That's how we do it. For the next few weeks, you might notice a few extra posters around the workplace, in break rooms, stock rooms, bathrooms, or glued to the back of a coworker. You already went to the bathroom, Ted. These are just there to tell you, like how expensive union dues are. $700. Think of what else you could buy with that. Like a Nintendo Wii with all the latest hits. Or, I don't know, what else do poor people like? Poor people. I know I've seen poor people. The drugs. Buy and eat drugs.
Did you know when a union enters a negotiation, our wages could go up or they could go down?
Wait, our wages could go up?
But they could go down.
Realistically, they'll go up.
But they could go down.
Okay, but without a union, what's stopping them from going down now?
But they could go down.
Right. Just technically speaking.
Hey, I want to talk to you about your attendance. Just remember, when it comes to unions, the choice is yours. When it comes to watching videos like this about unions, the choice is very much ours. Did I say stop waving?
You don't want to do, or you have to accept some reasonable restrictions on both of them. Now, to be fair, the NSA will argue that just because they can do something doesn't mean they do it, and that there are restrictions on their operations, such as the FISA court, which must approve requests for foreign surveillance. But in 34 years, that court has approved over 35,000 applications and only rejected 12. Yes, much like Robert Durst's second wife, the FISA court is alarmingly accepting. Listen, Robert, I'm not going to ask you too many questions. I'm just going to give you the benefit of a doubt that you clearly don't deserve. At least tell him to blink and burp less. The burping might be the most troubling thing about that job. So maybe it is time for us to talk about where the limits should be. And the best place to start would be Section 215. Not just because it's the easiest to understand, but because there is widespread agreement it needs to be reformed. From the President to Ted Cruz to both the ACLU and the NRA to even the guy who wrote the thing in the first place.
I was the principal author of the Patriot Act. I can say that without qualification. Congress never did intend to allow bulk collections when it passed Section 215, and no fair reading of the text would allow for this program.
Think about that. He was the author. That's the legislative equivalent of Lewis Carroll seeing the teacups ride at Disneyland and saying, "This has to be reined in. No fair reading of my text would allow for this ride. You've turned my perfectly nice tale of psychedelic pedophilia into a garish vomitorium. This is not what I wanted." And even the NSA has said that the number of terror plots in the US that the Section 215 telephone records programs has disrupted is one. And it's worth noting that one particular plot involved a cab driver in San Diego who gave $8,500 to a terror group. And that is the shittiest terrorist plot I've ever seen, other than the plot of A Good Day to Die Hard. But here's the big problem here. If we let Section 215 get renewed in its current form without serious public debate, we're in trouble. Because Section 215 is the canary in the coal mine. If we cannot fix that, we're not going to fix any of them. And the public debate so far has been absolutely pathetic. A year ago, a former congresswoman was discussing the 215 program on the news. Watch what happened.
This vast collection of data is not that useful, and
infringes substantially on personal privacy. I think at this point we should seriously consider not continuing Section 15 and getting the
Congresswoman, let me interrupt you just for a moment. We've got some breaking news out of Miami. Stand by, if you will. Right now in Miami, Justin Bieber has been arrested on a number of charges. The judge is reading the charges, including resisting arrest and driving under the influence. He's appearing now before the judge for his bond hearing. Let's watch.
Actually, you know what? Bad news. We're going to have to interrupt your interruption on the Bieber News for a new interruption, this time featuring a YouTube video of a tortoise having sex with a plastic clog. Let's watch. That is essentially the current tone of this vitally important debate. And again, I'm not saying this is an easy conversation, but we have to have it. I know this is confusing, and unfortunately, the most obvious person to talk to about this is Edward Snowden, but he currently lives in Russia, meaning if you wanted to ask him about any of these issues, you'd have to fly all the way there to do it, and it is not a pleasant flight. And the reason I know that is that last week I went to Russia to speak to Edward Snowden, and this is what happened. Yes, last week I spent 48 paranoid hours in Moscow, arguably the last place on earth where you can find an overweight Joseph Stalin impersonator arguing with an unconvincing fake Lenin. And after experiencing Russia's famously warm hospitality, I went to meet Edward Snowden, who was supposed to show up in this room at noon. However, at 5 minutes after the interview was scheduled to begin, I had a troubling thought. I don't know. You think he's coming? Because my argument is, why would he, when you think about it? I've got 2,000 rubles that says he doesn't make it without understanding how much that is. All I'm saying is, a 10-hour flight for an empty chair, I'm going to lose my shit. It turns out it may be a bit of a problem because our Russian producer booked us in a room directly overlooking the old KGB building and the home of the current Federal Security Bureau. And we've just been told they knew we're here. So that happened. Just if the Russian KGB is listening, ring the fire alarm if he's not coming. Oh, shit. Oh, God. So sorry for the delay. Holy shit. The most famous hero and traitor in recent American history. And I started with a question designed to test his loyalties. How much do you miss America?
You know, my country is something that travels with me, you know. It's not just a geography.
Well, that's already a way too complicated answer. The answer is, I miss it a lot. It's the greatest country in the world.
I do miss my country. I do miss my home. I do miss my family.
Do you miss Hot Pockets?
Yes. I miss Hot Pockets very much.
Okay. The entire state of Florida. Let's just let that silence hang in the air. Truck nuts. You miss truck nuts?
I don't know what they are.
Lucky for you, Edward. Not just truck nuts, Stars and Stripes truck nuts. That is 2 balls of liberty in a freedom sack.
You really thought ahead.
Well, at least one of us did. Because of the quandary, the nightmare that you're in. Okay, let's dive in. Why did you do this?
The NSA has the greatest surveillance capabilities that we've ever seen in history. Now, what they will do is that they don't use this for nefarious purposes against American citizens. In some ways, that's true. But the real problem is that they're using these capabilities to make us vulnerable to them and then saying, while I have a gun pointed at your head, I'm not going to pull the trigger. Trust me.
So, what's the NSA you want look like? Because you applied for a job at the NSA, so you clearly see an inherent value in that shadowy organization.
I worked with mass surveillance systems against Chinese hackers. I saw that, these things do have some purpose.
And you want your spies to be good at spying, to be fair.
Right. What you don't want is you don't want them spying inside their own country. Spies are great when they're on our side, but we can never forget that they're incredibly powerful, incredibly dangerous, and if they're off the leash, they can end up coming after us.
But just because we're talking about two different things here, domestic surveillance and foreign surveillance. Because domestic surveillance, Americans give some of a shit about. Foreign surveillance, they don't give any remote shit about.
Well, the second question is, when we talk about foreign surveillance, are we applying it in ways that are beneficial?
No one cares. No one cares. They don't give a shit.
We spied on UNICEF, the children's fund.
Sure.
We spied on lawyers negotiating.
What was UNICEF doing? I mean, that's the question there, isn't it?
The question is, are these programs valuable? Are we going to be safer when we're spying on UNICEF and lawyers who are talking about the price of shrimp and clove cigarettes?
I don't think people say that's good. I think they'll say, I definitely don't care. Americans do not give a shit
I think you're right.
about foreign surveillance.
What some people do care about is whether Snowden considered the adverse consequences of leaking so much information at once.
How many have you actually read?
I've evaluated all the documents that are in the archive.
You've read every single one?
Well, I do understand what I turned over.
But there's a difference between understanding what's in the documents and reading what's in the documents.
I recognize the concern.
Right, because when you're handing over thousands of NSA documents, the last thing you want to do is read them.
I think it's fair to be concerned about, did this person do enough? Were they careful enough?
Especially when you're handling material like we know you're handling.
Well, in my defense, I'm not handling anything anymore that's been passed to journalists, and they're using extraordinary security measures to make sure that this is reported in the most responsible way.
But those are journalists with a lower technical skill set than you.
That's true, but they do understand, just like you and I do, just how important it is to get this right.
So the New York Times took a slide, didn't redact it properly, and in the end, it was possible for people to see that something was being used in Mosul on Al Qaeda.
That is a problem.
Well, that's a fuck up.
It is a fuck up, and these things do happen in reporting. In journalism, we have to accept that some mistakes will be made. This is a fundamental concept of liberty.
Right, but you have to own that then. You're giving documents with information you know could be harmful, which could get out there.
Yes. If people act in bad faith.
You're not even talking about bad faith, you're talking about incompetence.
We are. But you will never be completely free from risk if you're free. The only time you can be free from risk is when you're in prison.
While the risks were significant, Snowden himself has made it clear he feels the rewards have been worth it.
You said in your letter to Brazil, I was motivated by a belief that the citizens of the world deserve to understand the system in which they live. My greatest fear was that no one would listen to my warning. Never have I been so glad to have been so wrong. How did that feel?
I was initially terrified that this was going to be a 3-day story. Everybody was going to forget about it. But when I saw that everybody around the world said, whoa, this is a problem. We have to do something about this. It felt like vindication.
Even in America?
Even in America. And I think we're seeing something amazing, which is if you ask the American people to make tough decisions, to confront tough issues, to think about hard problems, they'll actually surprise you.
Okay. Here's the problem. I did ask some Americans, and boy, did it surprise me.
I have no idea who Edward Snowden is.
You've never heard of Edward Snowden?
No.
I have no idea who Edward Snowden is.
I've heard the name. I just can't think right now exactly what it is.
Well, he sold some information to people. He revealed some information that shouldn't have been revealed.
Edward Snowden revealed a lot of documents through WikiLeaks.
Edward Snowden revealed a bunch of secrets, I guess, or information into WikiLeaks.
Edward Snowden leaked. He's in charge of WikiLeaks.
I'm in charge of WikiLeaks.
Not ideal. I guess on the plus side, you might be able to go home because it seems like no one knows who you are now.
You can't expect everybody to be uniform.
So, did you do this to solve a problem?
I did this to give the American people a chance to decide for themselves the kind of government they want to have. That is a conversation that I think the American people deserve to decide.
Oh, there's no doubt it is a critical conversation, but is it a conversation that we have the capacity to have? It's so complicated, we don't fundamentally understand it.
It is a challenging conversation. I mean, it's difficult for most people to even conceptualize. The problem is the internet is massively complex and so much of it is invisible. Service providers, technicians, engineers, the phone number.
Okay, let me stop you right there, Edward, because this is the whole problem.
Right.
This is the whole problem. I glaze over because it's like the IT guy comes into your office and you go, oh, shit.
In fairness,
oh, shit. Don't teach me anything. I don't want to learn. You smell like canned soup.
it's a real challenge to figure out how do we communicate things that require sort of years and years of technical understanding and compress that into seconds of speech. So I'm sympathetic to the problem there, Eddie.
But the thing is, everything you did only matters if we have this conversation properly. So let me help you out there. You mentioned in an interview that the NSA was passing around naked photos of people.
Yeah, this is something where it's not actually seen as a big deal in the culture of NSA because you see naked pictures all of the time.
That terrifies people because when we ask people about that, this is the response you get.
The government should not be able to look at dick pictures. If the government was looking at a penis, I definitely feel it would be an invasion of my privacy.
Yes, if the government was looking at pictures of my penis, that would upset me.
They should never, ever, the U.S. government have a picture of my dick.
If my husband had a picture of his penis and the government could access it, I would want that program to be shut down.
I would want the dick pic program changed. I would also want the dick pic program changed.
I think it would be terrific if the program could change. I would want it to be tweaked. I would want it to have clear and transparent laws that we knew about and that were communicated to us to understand what they were being used for or why they were being kept.
Do you think that program exists?
I don't think that program exists at all.
No.
If I had knowledge that the government had my dick, I would be very pissed off.
The good news is there's no program named the dick pic program. The bad news is they are still collecting everybody's information, including your dick pics.
What's the over under on that last guy having sent a dick pic recently? You don't need to guess. I'll show you.
I did. I did take a picture of my dick. And I sent it to a girl recently.
This is the most visible line in the sand for people. Can they see my dick? So with that in mind, look inside that folder. That is a picture of my dick. So let's go through each NSA program and explain to me its capabilities in regards to that photograph of my penis. So, 702 surveillance, can they see my dick?
Yes. The FISA Amendments Act of 2008, which Section 702 falls under, allows the bulk collection of internet communications that are one end foreign.
Bulk collection, now we're talking about my dick.
If you have your email somewhere like Gmail, posted on a server overseas or transferred overseas, or any time crosses outside the borders of the United States, your junk ends up in the database.
So it doesn't have to be sending your dick to a German.
No. Even if you send it to somebody within the United States, your wholly domestic communication between you and your wife can go from New York to London and back and get caught up in the database.
Executive Order 12333, dick or no dick?
Yes. EO 12333 is what the NSA uses when the other authorities aren't aggressive enough or they're not catching as much as they'd like. For example,
Because how are they going to see my dick? I'm only concerned about my penis.
when you send your junk through Gmail, for example, that's stored on Google's servers. Google moves data from data center to data center invisibly to you without your knowledge. Your data could be moved outside the borders of the United States temporarily. When your junk was passed by Gmail, the NSA caught a copy of that. Prism is how they pull your junk out of Google. Google's involvement. All of the different Prism partners, people like Yahoo, Facebook, Google, the government deputizes them to be sort of their little surveillance sheriff.
They're a dick sheriff.
Correct.
Upstream.
Upstream is how they snatch your junk as it transits the internet.
Okay, mystic.
If you're describing your junk on the phone, yes.
But do they have the content of that junk call or just the duration of it?
They have the content as well, but only for a few countries. If you are on vacation in the Bahamas, yes.
And finally, and you need to remind yourself.
No, I'm just not sure what to do with this. It's
just hold on to it.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, it is a lot of responsibility. That's the whole point.
Should I?
No, you should absolutely not. And it's unbelievable that you would do that. Actually, it's entirely believable. 215 Come on, Ed.
They can probably tell who you're sharing your junk pictures with because they're seeing who you're texting with, who you're calling.
If you called a penis enlargement center at 3 a.m. and that call lasted 90 minutes,
they would have a record of your phone number calling that phone number, which is a penis enlargement center. They would say they don't know it's a penis enlargement center, but of course they can look it up.
Edward, if the American people understood this, they would be absolutely horrified.
Yes, I never thought about putting it in the context of your junk.
Would a good takeaway from this be, until such time as we've sorted all of this out, just don't take pictures of your dick. Don't do it anymore.
No, if we do that, if we...
What you're saying, no? You should be taking pictures of your dick.
Yes, you shouldn't change your behavior because the government agency somewhere is doing it. If we sacrifice our values because we're afraid, we don't care about this very much.
That's a pretty inspiring answer to the question, hey, why did you just send me a picture of your dick? Because I love America, that's why. So there you have it, America. All of us should now be equipped to have this vital debate. Because by June 1st, it's imperative we have a rational, adult conversation about whether our safety is worth living in a country of fairly regulated, government-sanctioned dick sheriffs. And with my work here done, there was just time to take care of one more thing. And finally, congratulations on Citizens 4 winning the Oscar. I know you couldn't be at the ceremony for obvious reasons, so, wow, I thought we'd celebrate ourselves. Cheers.
Wow, that's really something. Thank you.
Well, what's the over-under on me getting back home safely?
Well, if you weren't on the list before, you are now.
Is that like a joke, or is that actually possible?
No, it's a real thing. You're associated now.
Okay, just to be clear, NSA, I've never met this guy, so take me off your fucking list, because I do not want to get stuck in Russia. the National Security Council and the White House, and we asked them to comment on the dick pic capabilities of each of the programs Edward Snowden just discussed, which incidentally were some very fun emails to write to government agencies. They did not wish to comment on the record, and I can see why for every possible reason. Moving on, our main story tonight concerns land, specifically the history of race and land ownership in America. A history that has many horrifying chapters, pretty much from chapter 1, when America was discovered from under other people's feet. In fact, it has so many horrifying chapters that some have nearly been forgotten, like this piece of local history that recently made the news.
In Manhattan Beach, California, a house on the sand can cost up to $20 million. And Anthony Bruce's family used to own 2 oceanfront lots.
I should be a millionaire standing here talking to you today.
More than 100 years ago, his great-great-grandparents, Willa and Charles Bruce, bought the land for about $1,200. They built a resort called Bruce's Lodge.
The Ku Klux Klan was involved in harassing them.
They burned a cross right out here.
And when that didn't drive them away, the city government decided to take the property under the guise of eminent domain.
Wow. So when the cross burning didn't drive the Bruces out of town, the city called in a lawyer to finish the job. And that tells you a lot about how racism in America works. Sure, the vigilante racists are spooky, but you really the motherfuckers with advanced degrees show up. What Manhattan Beach did to the Bruce family was clearly unforgivable, and to its credit, the city seems to be trying to reckon with how to deal with what happened. It is also placing some pretty hard limits on that reckoning.
The council did authorize spending $350,000 on art to commemorate the family, and this week voted to acknowledge and condemn what happened, but chose not to offer an official apology.
It's awful. It's wrong. We're not that community now. I wouldn't live here if we were a racist community, and my friends and neighbors would not live here as well.
Okay, couple of things there. First, Manhattan Beach's population is only 0.5% black, so even if you are not that community now, you don't look unlike it. And second, if you took something worth $20 million, $350,000 just doesn't cover it, especially when none of that money went toward the family you stole it from. There is pretty obviously only 2 ways of making this right. Give the Bruces $20 million or give them their land back. And incredibly, the latter might actually happen, because LA County, which owns the land, recently released a plan for returning it to the Bruces, which is, to put it mildly, about time. It's literally been called Bruce's Beach since 2006. Is the apostrophe S a fucking joke to you people? It indicates possession. So the story of Bruce's Beach might actually end with something approaching justice. Land was taken away, land is given back. And I want you to keep the elegance of that solution in mind as we talk about a far more insidious and widespread form of wealth appropriation, and that is housing discrimination. There is a long history